remember working at the pub and started hearing rumours.
Mum, dad, 2 children slaughtered in their own home.
Massive shock to the local community that something so awful could happen to such a lovely family.
This was an all-out slaughter of 4 people.
No one really knew what had happened, how it had happened, or why it had happened.
Are the family involved in some way with organised crime? Is this a contract killing because it's so brutal?
A family wiped out and a man going missing leaves a community asking questions.
Detectives were left pondering, was this missing persons case linked to a quadruple murder case?
There was a point in this inquiry where I was thinking if we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no luck at all.
You didn't feel safe in the village.
Police were playing catch-up.
I can't think of another crime of this magnitude in the history of Northamptonshire Police.
In the beautiful Northampton countryside lies the quaint village of Wootton.
It's really lovely. Everyone knows everyone, so it's really chatty, really friendly. Yeah, it is nice, especially to have kids around here.
I love it. I know it's an old village. The church is very, very old, and we're in a conservation area, so people around here are very, very friendly. People have lived here for a long time. There are some families in the village who've been in the village a long, long time, so I think it says an awful lot. Very easygoing, yeah. Good community.
Wootton has a great community spirit. It has a lot of buildings, facilities, open space, considering it's an urban parish. There's the new building, Wootton Fields and Simpson Manor, and then there's the old village, which has got all its old traditional spirit with the church and the old village hall.
You've got the Yeoman of England pub in the village, Working Men's Club, you've got a community centre, they put on events, they do a food market every Saturday. Everyone helps each other out, everyone looks out for each other.
So Wootton was the perfect place for Jeff and Helen Ding, originally from East China, to raise their 2 daughters, Zing and Alice.
Jeff was a university lecturer up in Manchester, very educated man in the science field. Helen worked at the local school teaching languages. They had 2 daughters, Zing, also known as Nancy, and then they had a younger daughter, Alice, of whom Nancy was very protective.
Family life was busy, especially as Jeff split his week between home and his work at Manchester Metropolitan University.
I believe Jeff was a senior lecturer here, specialisms in polymers, so synthetic materials. His teaching was at first-year level. We all pride ourselves, giving support to our students, but Jeff really took that to a fantastic level. He spent most of his time with students, helping out with various problems that they might have with their studies, for instance. He was actually a hall warden in a halls of residence just on campus. I don't think I ever saw him once lose his temper or ever have any issues with staff. Very easy to get on with.
The Ding's eldest daughter, 18-year-old Zing, was an accomplished musician and preparing to go to university.
Zing came over as being very self-assured, very calm, very capable. She had a wicked sense of humour, and she was quite a live wire. But she managed to be friendly to everybody she met. She was good at everything. She was a remarkable student at school, and she'd already accepted a place at Nottingham University to study medicine.
Like her sister, 12-year-old Alice was also a keen musician.
Alice was quite bubbly. She had one of those smiles that would light up any room. A bit of a cheeky smile, but she was absolutely delightful. Very outgoing. You could tell she was the whole package as a violinist. I think both of the girls had a very strong work ethic, and no doubt that come down to them from their parents.
Both Jeff and Helen worked tirelessly to create a warm and inviting home for their daughters and their friends.
Really welcoming. You could literally turn up and they would invite you in for dinner. They were just such a good family. Like, you would want your kids to be friends with them because they were just the best.
They all seemed very happy and very settled. They loved that family home as well. That was a place they really liked to be. And it is a very nice neighbourhood, I have to say.
But this neighbourhood will never be the same after one fateful bank holiday in 2011.
It was a big holiday weekend. We'd had the royal wedding.
When William and Kate got married, the whole of the parish here was alive with street parties, Union flags everywhere, bunting, a lot of celebration. It was a super happy place.
I was actually working in the pub on the royal wedding. We opened early for it. Not many people actually came in because loads of people around the village were actually throwing street parties.
As the bank holiday weekend comes to a close, neighbours of the Ding family become concerned as they haven't been seen all weekend.
One of the family was due to attend something and they didn't turn up. And then the neighbour went round to see if they were okay and see where they were. The house was in relative darkness, no reply at the front door. That neighbour, thankfully, was a little bit persistent and went round to the back of the house.
Peering through the kitchen window, the neighbour glimpses what appears to be a body on the floor.
The police are alerted and clearly force entry to the premises.
As the officers enter the house, they discover not one, but two bodies.
Jeff is slumped by a radiator in the kitchen with multiple stab wounds. Helen is by the entrance door between the hall and the kitchen, and she's got multiple stab wounds.
The officers head upstairs and step into a harrowing scene.
Alice and Zing were up in the bedroom. The two girls are on the bed and they've both received a number of fatal stab wounds. You know, it was pretty horrendous.
With 4 members of the same family dead, detectives' first instinct is that the culprit could be amongst the deceased.
Nobody knows the reason that this family have ended up dead. One possible scenario is, and it does happen, is the murder-suicide aspect where a family member has, for whatever reason, killed the other family members and then taken their own life.
With such a heavy police presence, rumours quickly spread across the village.
I remember working at the pub at the time and started hearing rumours, customers coming in saying something really bad had happened, but we were all still unsure of the extent of what had happened.
I first heard through a friend who I live near locally, whose daughter was very good friends with one of the young ladies. So it was horrific locally to everybody. The fact that the family had been there for a while and been not discovered was horrific, and a massive shock to the local community that something so awful could happen to such a lovely family. I wouldn't like to speculate on people's opinions, but to me personally, it felt a bit targeted.
Little did the villagers of Wootton know the scale of the crime that's been committed on their doorstep.
The murder of the Ding family was probably one of the most horrendous crimes I've ever been asked to investigate.
In the village of Wootton, police have discovered a family of 4 dead. Detective Superintendent Glyn Timmins is put in charge of the investigation.
I was at home on Sunday the 1st of May, enjoying the bank holiday weekend, and my colleague alerted me to the fact that he'd been called to the scene of potentially a multiple murder scene.
46-year-olds Jeff and Helen Ding and their 2 daughters, 18-year-old Zing and 12-year-old Alice, have all suffered fatal knife wounds.
I think what you're trying to do initially is you're trying to rationalise it in terms of what's a likely motive. Why would a family be murdered? You could be looking for a crazed, maniacal killer who's randomly struck at a household. You could be looking for aggravated burglars where it's gone horribly, horribly wrong. Are the family involved in some way with organised crime? Is this a contract killing because it's so brutal? You never stop searching your mind for options and potential and possibilities.
In Wootton, the heavy police presence has drawn in local reporter Daniel Owens.
It was around about 10 o'clock on the Sunday night when I first arrived on the scene. There was no information coming from the police. We couldn't speak to officers who were inside the house. All we were getting was the people outside guarding the scene, and they weren't telling us anything. I met a couple of lads down there who knew the family vaguely, and they seemed quite upset at what they'd heard. And there were theories doing the rounds that it was potentially a murder-suicide situation. When you have a man and a woman dead in the same house, one killed the other, turned the knife on himself, etc. And that was certainly something that we expected to be exploring.
But in a fast-moving investigation, it's quickly established that the culprit isn't likely to be one of the family.
Clearly, because of the violence that had been used, it was just obvious to the officers that this was an all-out slaughter of 4 people. The big demand at that stage is, well, there are 2. The first one is the preservation of the scene and to make sure that you extract and harvest every centimetre of forensic evidence that you can get hold of. And the other one is to start thinking about who's done this and why.
With a murderer in their midst, police are also aware that villagers could be at risk.
The overriding factor in terms of the community is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear that it might happen again, fear that there's a killer on the loose, that their homes and their loved ones and their families aren't safe.
Police held a press conference and details started to emerge, and we knew this was a story that we'd never seen the likes of before.
For villagers, the news turns what was a happy bank holiday to celebrate the marriage of Prince William and Kate into a tragic event on their own doorstep.
When everybody's enjoying a day, and it was a beautiful day, it's hard to believe that something so vicious can happen. We were just stunned, really stunned. You can't believe it, because you cannot understand, A, why anybody could do that to a family and to children. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock.
Well, I was walking to my grandparents and I saw there was a bit of commotion going on the street. I was about 2 streets away. So, yeah, it was very weird. I don't think I wanted to leave the house for a while. I think it made everyone a bit more cautious about what was going on.
People were very on edge. I mean, I wouldn't walk on my own anywhere. I think you didn't feel safe in the village anymore. You don't ever feel like something like that's ever going to happen in a little village.
I was absolutely devastated. I really could not get my head around it. It was a very, very sad day. Not just for me, but for all of my colleagues, for the whole community that we work in here.
As the community mourns, police need to establish exactly when the Ding family were killed.
The initial response is pretty much routine. You're starting to set up initial house-to-house inquiries, not structured formal ones, but sort of people knocking doors. Have you seen anything strange or suspicious? Has there been any screams, shouts, noises?
But the neighbours haven't seen or heard anything.
Effectively, we've got 4 people who've been slaughtered in their own home and very little else by way of information.
As each member of the family is examined, it's apparent that whoever was responsible carried out a frenzied attack.
The results of the post-mortem showed the true extent of the brutality involved. The family were subjected to a total of 51 stab wounds between them, with Jeff and his wife killed in the kitchen and the girls killed upstairs in their bedroom trying to hide from their killer.
In the house, a possible murder weapon is found. It's been cleaned and left on the kitchen worktop. And as police comb the scene for clues, they find a puzzling item in the Dings letterbox. It's a calling card from West Midlands Police, and it's been left just hours before the bodies were discovered.
The visit took place on the Sunday morning, quite early on. Obviously, no reply at the front door, but it's early on a Sunday morning, not unreasonable for people to be in bed. It's a bank holiday weekend. The officers got no reply.
Why had the police visited the Dings home early that morning? Who did they want to speak to? And was this in some way connected to their murders?
Someone I'd worked with previously was a detective superintendent in West Midlands. He rang me to say, was I aware of this missing persons inquiry?
Police had visited the Dings in relation to a missing persons inquiry, that of 52-year-old An Zhang Du.
An Zhang Du was a native of China and came over here in the late 90s with his wife, and he ran a herbal medicines business, which he ran with the Ding family for some time.
An Zhang had left his home on the bank holiday Friday, 2 days before his business partners, the Ding's bodies, were discovered.
An Zhang Du left his wife at home watching the wedding while he boarded a train to Birmingham, where he went into his business premises.
He was going to open up the shop, albeit a bank holiday, albeit Kate and William's wedding. He'd gone in to do some work. When An Zhang Du didn't return from work, his wife, she started to become concerned about him, where he might be, what state he was in.
It was totally out of character for him, and she was tearing her hair out with despair at where he was.
At some point later in that day, she reported him as a missing person to West Midlands Police.
An Zhang's wife also described the night before he went missing and an unexpected knock at their door late at night.
Court officers turned up at An Zhang Du's house and served court documents. The ultimate outcome of the service of that court process would have resulted in bankruptcy for Mr. Du and his family. Mr. Du did not sleep that night. He was pacing up and down. He was clearly angry, agitated. It really had disturbed him.
The missing persons inquiry was raised on the Saturday, and as part of that investigation, police attended An Zhang Du's business premises in Birmingham, where they found a note, effectively saying goodbye to his wife.
Leaving a note and with no contact for 4 days, police consider the possibility An Zhang has taken his own life.
Clearly, you know, in terms of mindset, in terms of where he was at mentally at that stage, that would ring significant alarm bells for both, obviously, his wife and the police investigating his disappearance.
Police want to know, what was An Zhang Du's fate? Could he also have been a victim of the Ding's killer?
What detectives were left pondering was whether the missing persons case was now linked to a quadruple murder.
But what detectives uncover next points not only to An Zhang's fate, but also a motive for murder.
There was this legal dispute over business between the two families, and that there was a strong possibility that something had led to a coming together of Mr. Du on the one side and the Ding family on the other.
The quiet village of Wootton has been shocked by the mass murder of the Ding family. University lecturer Jeff, language teacher Helen, and their daughters Zing and Alice. All 4 have been found stabbed to death.
Wootton was not an area affected by crime, yet all of a sudden the world's media descended on their doorstep. It went from 0 to 60 in seconds.
I doubt anybody in the country had really heard about Wootton Parish. And suddenly it was all over the news, headline news. It was shocking that actually somebody had murdered somebody in our village, and it's suddenly all over the world. On the BBC, for want of a better word, suddenly Wootton is there. It's just bizarre.
It's just a normal village that people come to and live or work or whatever. It's just a normal village. When we heard what happened, how it happened, You can't believe it because you cannot understand why anybody could do that to a family and to children. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock.
Police have linked another investigation to the Dings murder, that of a missing persons inquiry for former business partner An Zhang-du. He disappeared just days before the family of 4 were found, and it's been discovered that both families were at war.
An Zhang-du and his wife had been involved in a bitter legal dispute with the Dings since 1999. It had been rumbling on for a long time. This relates to a breakdown in the business relationship.
This falling out resulted in a 10-year legal battle, which culminated in a late-night visit from lawyers.
Du and his wife had been served with a court injunction ordering them to repay £88,000, which forced them into a financial black hole and near bankruptcy.
This is a man that's completely at 6s and 7s. He's been knocked completely off his axis in terms of his future and what's going to happen to him.
Du clearly felt massively aggrieved. He'd put his life's work into this business and had it torn from underneath him, really.
That's when the bells start ringing and you've got the basis of a real solid motive for homicide.
Police believe An Zhang-du's anger at being summoned to pay the Dings an £88,000 settlement makes him a prime suspect. But they have yet to find any evidence which connects him to the crime.
What we would have to do is put Mr. Du at the scene of the murders.
All eyes turn to tracking An Zhang-du's movements on the day he went missing. He's first spotted on CCTV at his business in Birmingham.
He left the shop probably within 10 or 15 minutes of having arrived there.
He's next seen heading to a train station.
We traced him to New Street, so therefore we knew which train and platform he was on.
An Zhang-du then boards a train to Northampton.
There's CCTV footage of him on an escalator at Northampton bus station. So we know he transferred from the train station to the bus station. We then know that he got onto a bus that went to Wootton Village, and there is CCTV of An Zhang-du actually asking the driver of that bus for directions. Obviously, he was trying to establish where Jeff and Helen's house was in Pioneer Close.
So if you see down the road and you see the bus stop just down the road, that's where he came off the bus to come into the village. He got off and he came down this way and I think went into the local store and asked for directions. So why would you think if somebody's asking you directions that there's anything the matter? You just think he's going to meet friends on that special day.
This represents a significant milestone in both inquiries. The person at the heart of the missing persons case, An Zhang-du, has been placed in the vicinity of the Dings family home on the day they were murdered.
So we're now putting him closer and closer to the scene, and subsequently we have the sighting of a gentleman of Chinese appearance stood outside the Ding family household, probably about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 29th. So it's getting more and more and more likely that that person is An Zhang-du.
Now a prime suspect in the murder of a family of 4, police need to find out where he went next. But then the trail goes cold. An Zhang-du isn't seen on CCTV either leaving the area on foot or by bus.
There was an understandable level of fear among neighbours. 4 of their friends, including 2 young children, had been killed, and the person responsible hadn't been apprehended. He was on the loose. Where was he? Would he return? Would he do it again?
With days since the murders took place and no idea where the suspect could be, detectives examine every possible angle.
He's already got a 2-day head start on us. What we discovered in house-to-house routine inquiries is that the Ding family, their family car had gone in for service, and as a result they'd been given a hire car or a courtesy car to run around in, and that car was not at the Ding family household.
Police were now able to issue a name and a picture of their main suspect with a warning not to approach him in any circumstances. They revealed the car he was driving, and the country was put on alert to help find this man who was wanted in connection with 4 brutal murders.
The manhunt for An Zhang Du puts all forces across the UK on alert.
Police investigating the murders of a family of 4 in the village of Wootton, Northampton, have released information on a man wanted for questioning. 52-year-old Chinese national An Zhang Du was last seen 4 days ago, driving a silver Vauxhall Corsa. Members of the public are being advised not to approach him.
The pressure's immense, and it's a responsibility not just on your own professional reputation, but, you know, there's a community out there who expects the police to capture somebody who's this dangerous.
Key to tracking An Zhang Du is using automatic number plate recognition cameras.
We were hoping that modern technology such as ANPR, which is a very, very standard form of police inquiry, would help us out in that situation.
After multiple inquiries, a lead comes in. The stolen car's number plate triggered a camera on the night of the murders at a service station just outside Northampton on the M1.
And it showed that that vehicle, that hire vehicle, had been there at about 10:15 on the evening of the 29th. And An Zhang Du had been in to buy some chocolate or a drink, and importantly, a map book.
But where An Zhang is going, detectives don't know. ANPR cameras are checked, and there's no sign of the stolen car on any road in the UK. An Zhang Du has vanished.
At this point, police had no idea of An Zhang Du's whereabouts. Was he dead? Was he alive? Was he even in the UK?
While the manhunt intensifies, the Ding's friends and family are trying to come to terms with what's happened.
There was great sorrow from the students, especially those who were close to him doing projects and so on with him. A great sense of shock and sorrow that someone that helped them so much, of course, now was no longer with us.
For Zing and Alice's friends, meeting at their first county orchestral practice is a traumatic time.
It affected many of the other students very deeply. At orchestral rehearsals in the following week, flowers were left on their chairs. You know, teaching is one thing, but no one can prepare you for... How does a teacher cope with this? I don't know. No one prepares you for that.
For Jeff's family, struggling with the loss is only compounded by the grief of not knowing why this happened.
Actually, I first learned from the internet news, and I was completely shocked. I even cannot finish the news. Okay, once I saw the picture, I just, I cannot believe there's a 4 members all gone. It's just complete shock. Okay, and then I think about my parents. If I cannot, I manage that, think about the parents. They lost their children, their grandchildren, only one day.
Police investigating the murders of a family of 4 from Northampton have said they are concentrating their inquiries in London after a car stolen from the property was found parked near the Edgware Road.
After weeks of searching, the police get their first lead on their hunt for An Zhang Du, and it's created major problems for the investigation.
Unfortunately for us, Mr. Du, in his stolen hire car, managed to get all the way to St John's Wood in London without triggering a single police ANPR system. There was a point in this inquiry where I was thinking if we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no luck at all. Because not only did he miss ANPR, but when that car's parked in a side street in St John's Wood, The car is ticketed 9 times in 11 days, so we're now 13 days behind now. That's a significant problem in an investigation, because if you can go more or less anywhere in the world in 2 days, the world is literally your oyster in 13.
Whilst Du could be anywhere in the world, police concentrate their search in London.
Anyone who's been to London knows how easy it is to become anonymous in a city of that size and what opportunities there are to disappear within various communities. Obviously, that was a huge concern to us, because if Ang Zhang Du wanted to lie low, then there's no finer place for him to do that and become anonymous and not be troubled too much. We're back to needle in a haystack time.
House-to-house inquiries uncover CCTV footage of Ang Zhang Du abandoning his stolen car in the early hours of the Friday night. Which reinforces detective suspicions that he's still in the area. The investigation moves to Chinatown in London's West End, and officers hand out wanted posters.
Obviously, language is an issue, although clearly most of the Chinese community within those areas will speak English. I think the most difficult cultural barrier is a natural reluctance to become involved with the police. And some people, even thought it was bad luck to put posters in shop windows and things like that. So, you've got to overcome those, but all you can do is reach out and engage and try and gain their confidence, but it certainly doesn't make it easier.
Whilst he's made it to London, police intel suggests that Ang Zhang Du wouldn't have gone far.
He was described to us as somebody innocuous, someone who probably would struggle to find his way round of his own volition,
Little did police know just how wrong this intel would prove to be.
Du had made his way through France and Spain and had been seen getting on a ferry from Tangier to Morocco. He'd also been stopped at a border in Algeria. With multiple sightings, this had now become an international manhunt.
Police hunting for a man suspected of murdering a family of 4 from Wootton Village in Northamptonshire have put out a reward of £25,000 for information which could lead to his arrest. Detectives say there have been over 380 sightings of Ang Zhang Du across Europe, but the 52-year-old has now been missing for almost a year.
Having reviewed over 5,000 hours of CCTV footage and interviewing over 2,000 people, police have discovered that Ang Zhang Du is no longer in the country.
It's a mind-blowing thought, because literally there are 6 billion people in this world. Where do we start? Which country do we start with? You're just thinking, oh my goodness, where do we go from here?
I doubt anybody in the country had really heard about Wootton Parish. And suddenly it was all over the news, headline news. This guy had come into our parish, he'd committed these dreadful murders, and then he was running off around the world where they couldn't find him. It put Wootton for a while in the news.
It was strange having Wootton put out there like that.
Through CCTV analysis, police have uncovered Ang Zhang Du's journey from Wootton to London and then onwards.
He took a coach to the coast and then over to Paris, then onwards to a Spanish port. The long and short of it is, by the time the police became aware of the bodies, he was out of the country. He's gone.
The police reach out to forces around the world and decide to travel to Spain.
Detectives had issued an appeal on the Spanish version of Crime Watch, and that appeal went out far and wide across the country.
That broadcast was seen also in Morocco, and my understanding is that as a result of that, a supervisor or foreman on the building site where Ang Zhang Du had been working as a labourer He alerted the local authorities, and the local authorities arrested Ang Zhang-du after something like 14 months of being on the run.
Yeah, I remember when they caught him, I remember thinking, how on earth did he get there? Unnoticed and working, actually. How is he working? It shows they don't have the same laws that we have here about working. But yes, it was great. It was a good feeling to know he'd been caught.
I remember when the news broke out that he was being extradited back to the UK to be charged for the murders. Everyone felt like justice was finally going to be done.
But even though Ang Zhang-du is safely locked up in a Moroccan jail, it's another 6 months before he's returned to the UK and charged with 4 counts of murder. It's taken over 2 years, but the trial into the murders of 4 members of the Ding family begins at Northampton Crown Court.
Surprisingly, Du pleaded not guilty in the court case. His version of events was that he'd gone round there to simply talk to the Du family and things had spiralled out of control.
The issue for this trial was not so much whether he killed the Ding family, it's whether he did it as a murderer of sound mind or whether there was some kind of diminished element.
The court hears how on the 29th of April 2011, Ang Zhang-du was furious after he received a court order after a lengthy legal battle with Jeff and Helen Ding. His assets were frozen and he was ordered to pay the Dings £88,000. So, while the nation watched William and Kate get married, Ang Zhang-du had gone to his shop to pick up a kitchen knife. Then, he headed towards the village where the Ding family lived.
My belief is that when he left the New Street station just after 11, he was going to Wootton in Northamptonshire with one thing on his mind, and that thing was murder, the ultimate revenge.
Ang Zhang-du admits he entered the Ding's house via the back gate and finds Jeff Ding in the kitchen. They argue, and he stabs Jeff multiple times before attacking his wife Helen. He then goes upstairs and kills Zing and Alice. They are both huddled together in one bedroom.
What I can't reconcile, what I'll never be able to understand, is when that anger, that evilness, that bile is such that it makes a grown man climb a set of stairs, enter a room with 2 young girls cowering on a bed, frightened beyond description, and then plunge a knife into both of them and fatally wound them both without any compunction or restriction, just to execute 2 young. I'll never get over it. I'll never understand it.
During the trial, the jury also hears a recording of a 999 call. It was made by one of the girls when they heard Ang Zhang-du attacking their parents.
It transpired that a 999 call had been made from the property at the time of the killings. Police had responded to the call but had been sent to the wrong address and had no answer, and therefore the case was effectively closed.
I've heard that tape recording. It's horrific. Absolutely horrific. And those screams, I won't forget them, because I know what was happening when those girls were screaming, because a murderer had entered the room and was in the process of fatally murdering those 2 girls. Absolutely. I can't reconcile myself to that action. It's horrendous.
As the trial progresses, further details emerge about what happened after Du murdered the family.
After killing the family of 4, Du stayed in the house for 6 hours and actually went to sleep.
He then takes the time to wash the kitchen knife that he brought with him and leaves it on the kitchen worktop before stealing money and the Ding's hire car. He manages to evade authorities for over a year. But after a 2-week trial, Ang Sang Du is found guilty of all 4 counts of murder.
Ang Sang Du was found guilty of multiple murders and was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the longest sentence ever passed down in the history of courts in Northamptonshire.
With all due respect, Ang Sang Du is exactly where he should be in terms of the crime he committed and public safety.
The community were pleased that something so barbaric had gone full circle, really, and the man who had carried out this dreadful crime had been put away.
The fact that he's never gonna get out of prison, yeah, but it still should never have happened. But they've got as much justice as possible.
After 10 years, those that knew the family are still coming to terms with the loss.
I don't think there's ever any way that justice can ever really be done that can make up, really, for what happened. There isn't. And that's the closest we can get. And whatever punishment, he got is never going to make up for, for what happened that day.
I suppose there was some sense of, OK, that's over now. But you're never going to get those girls back, ever. And that's going to remain with me for the rest of my life.
Ang Sang Du will be 92 years old before he's eligible for release. But for Jeff's brother, Ji Xiang, life will never be the same.
I cannot accept, the reality, basically. And then I think about my parents. They lost their children, their grandchildren, only one day. I have many, many, many questions to ask him. Among them, the only one question that strikes me most is, I want to ask him, how could you stab a knife into an innocent girl's heart? Not once, but twice. How could you do that? An innocent girl, you get that in. I'm not that confident whether I can rebuild my life anymore. I don't think my life will be the same again as before.
It looked as if the body had been dropped from the sky.
I could hear my mum screaming, and by then I just knew.
It just wasn't right, so it fills you with a cold dread.
So here we are coming to the stage where the serial killer effect kicked in.
Early in the morning of the 28th of August 1981, a commuter discovered the mutilated body of a young girl dumped by the Thames in Windsor. Unable to pinpoint exactly where she'd been killed meant that finding the killer was like looking for a needle in a haystack. All the police knew for certain was that they were looking for a violent and sadistic individual who took pleasure in inflicting pain, and that he was likely to do it again. Built on the banks of the River Thames in Berkshire is the town of Windsor. It's home to Windsor Castle, which has been an official residence of the British royal family for almost 1,000 years.
Windsor is a very, very busy town, very busy tourist town. However, the village of Windsor, the residence area of Windsor, is very local, just like any other village, and everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody else's business.
On a bright, sunny Friday morning in August 1981, Kenneth Linney of Thames Valley Police received a phone call, starting a case that would become a 30-year personal crusade.
I was at home and I received a call about 6:30 in the morning to say that a body had been found on the banks of the Thames in Windsor. I immediately attended.
When Detective Superintendent Linney reached the scene at 6:45, he was met by a horrific sight.
I arrived at Barry Avenue, where the body was in a face-down position, naked, that of a teenage girl, and it transpired that it was found by a man on his way to work. He immediately notified the police. I then made various phone calls and got other officers out to form an inquiry team and the uniformed officers to seal the area off, and from there it went on into a general investigation.
There was no attempt to conceal the body, in fact, far from it. And one can only speculate as to the significance of this, but it could be that leaving the body in that condition to full public view might have been an additional twist to the humiliation of the victim.
Houseboats moored just meters from the body were immediately investigated.
All those boats were stopped from moving, and officers then started interviewing the occupants to see if they'd heard anything during the night.
By 7 a.m. they had ascertained that no one had heard anything, and Detective Superintendent Linney continued organising the investigation.
I notified then the Home Office pathologist. I then formulated a small incident room at Windsor Police Station until we had identified the body. It was very important to find out who this girl was. No girl had been reported missing in the Windsor area.
Almost 13 miles away near Hanwell in West London, mother of 3 Carol Walterson made a worrying discovery about her 17-year-old daughter Claire.
Went to wake her up and she wasn't in her bed, and it just wasn't right, so it fills you with a cold dread.
A worried Carol went to work, whilst in Windsor the police investigation continued.
It looked as if the body had been dropped from the sky due to the fact there was no blood or anything outside the basic body area. And bear in mind that there were severe wounds to the body. This was a problem for us. But we could find no forensic evidence as to where it was dropped from.
The forensic team then went about doing a procedure called taping.
Taping is done with sellotape to take any particles off the body. It's laid out then and sealed and used later on then for forensic report purposes.
In the early 80s, forensic scientists could only compare and match fibre samples. So until they found a comparison, the tapings were sent for storage. Then a preliminary investigation was carried out by the pathologist at the scene.
The wounds that were on the body could have been done in situ, where the body was found. But the body was definitely unconscious, if not lifeless, when it was laid on the footpath.
The pathologist found that Claire's throat had been cut and she'd been sadistically mutilated. It was too much, even for the most experienced of officers.
The injuries caused to the girl, horrific injuries that were caused to her, and how she must have suffered. And I think it affects you. I had four daughters. And I could see my teenage daughters in the same situation. So it does affect you.
It wasn't long before this horrendous and baffling murder made the national news.
I went to work and heard on the radio that they'd found somebody, her body, and I just knew it was her. I just knew it was her from where they found her in Windsor, which wasn't far from us. I don't know why, I just knew it was her, so I went into a complete panic. I phoned all the friends that I knew to see whether she was there. I phoned her work, and they were very cross that she just hadn't turned up. So I got home and went straight to the police station.
Once Claire had been reported missing, police quickly made the potential link.
The Metropolitan Police rang to say that a girl was missing from the Hanwell area. So we've notified them again, and officers came down and they identified the body.
Certain they had the right person, it was time for the police to tell the family and confirm Carol's worst fears.
Yes, it was her. After they looked at photos and things. And I can't even begin to describe what it was like after that.
Claire's older brother Nick arrived home, hoping his sister was still just missing.
After I heard it on the radio and everything else, and I made my way home, and as I was walking down the pavement, I could hear my mum screaming indoors. I could hear her screaming, and by then I just knew as well. And I think it was the police or someone that answered the door, and I think I just turned and said, "Is it?" or something, and they said, "Yeah."
Thames Valley police officers wasted no time looking into Claire's background.
I went up with another officer to Yedding Lane, to the family home, and there spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Wilton. They, of course, were in a terrible state, and I then again got officers to sit with them and left them to mourn their fate. It was a terrible shock, because the girl was used to going out during the day, and she was a local girl, and was well liked by everybody in the district.
On a council estate, there wasn't too much to do, but you have lots of friends, so she was always with friends, and, well, we always had a house full of friends. I think that was more her enjoyment. And also when she got her job, that became the be-all and end-all of her life, because she loved it so much and obviously loved the people there as well.
The next morning, the sun may have risen as usual, but for Claire's mum, Carol, the world as she knew it had ended.
All I can really remember is the house being full of policemen. It was just basically showing photos, and so really then we were dealing with it the next day when we knew it really was her, and been dealing with it ever since.
Whilst the family began a lifetime of grieving, the police continued with their investigation, determined to find Claire's vicious killer.
It was decided that an incident room, a major incident room, should be set up in the Metropolitan Police District.
Pete Byrne was a young policeman at that time.
I was involved in the investigation, in that I was a young detective and was part of the 50-strong team of detectives that worked on the investigation.
The police's first job was to build up a picture of Claire and her final movements on that fateful Thursday night.
Claire was ironing, and We said, "Are you going out tonight?" And she said, "No."
Me and Claire was just sitting in the kitchen having a chat, which was unusual really. We was having a good old chat and everything, and she weren't going out that night. And that, you know. But the funny thing was, I remember, God, we must be growing up because of the way we was talking to each other. But I don't know, she was staying in and that was it.
But when we got home, she had gone out. She was 17, it wasn't a problem. But she was always in by 10 o'clock or abouts. But I thought 17, okay, it's 11 o'clock, you know. It's always the first time. But then when she didn't come home, couldn't sleep at all because it just wasn't like her. She'd never been away all night unless we'd known about it. But then I heard laughing outside and I thought, oh, she's home. So I went off to sleep.
It didn't take long for police to piece together Claire's last night.
On the Thursday evening, Claire had gone to see her boyfriend who ran an amusement arcade on the Uxbridge Road at Ealing. She had left there around about 10 p.m. Normally, he would have given her a lift home, but they had a slight disagreement and she refused a lift. So she walked along the Uxbridge Road in the direction of her home in Northolt. Her boyfriend did attempt to get her into the car, stopped, asked her to get into the car, but she refused. That sighting of Claire being spoken to by her boyfriend is the last known sighting of Claire alive.
The boyfriend was immediately treated as a suspect.
He said he went home then by 10:30 that night, but he was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Even though the police had been left with no clues, could they have already managed to find the murderer? In August 1981, 17-year-old Claire Walterton had been horrifically murdered and dumped in Windsor, and so far, no forensic evidence had been found. Police had quickly pieced together Claire's final movements, identifying the last person she was seen with, who was arrested for murder and questioned.
Inquiries in relation to his whereabouts later on that evening revealed that he had gone home and was seen by a neighbour walking a dog shortly afterwards, so therefore he was ruled out as being the potential attacker of Claire.
With their only suspect now eliminated, the police looked at using the power of publicity.
There was a lot of media activity, television and all, up at Hanwell. And of course the papers then had the large columns on it.
Information about Claire's last night was released by police to the press.
Two ladies came forward following publicity and said that they'd seen a girl dragged into a car at the junction of Uxbridge and Yedding Lane about roughly around the time that Claire was last seen. They couldn't give any descriptions. All they could say was a dark-coloured car.
Keen to get the most from their only lead, police weren't afraid to try experimental techniques.
I resorted to hypnotists actually interviewing some of these people because we felt that if you can probably refresh someone's memory by that means, then, of course, we may come up with something that the person doesn't think of normally.
Hypnotism didn't seem to have the desired effect.
Whether that person that the lady saw was Claire is unknown. A large part of the initial investigation centred on trying to identify that vehicle, but it was never traced.
The ladies were so vague about this. They thought a girl was pulled into a car. There was no screams, nothing whatsoever. And it was some distance away they saw it. So there was no evidential value, really, in that particular incident.
Disappointed but undeterred, the investigation team continued with their inquiries.
The incident room then, once we established it at Norwood Green, became a very busy place because we had to do a lot of house-to-house inquiries from Hanwell down the Uxbridge Road, right up to the top of Yedding Lane, which would have covered at the area where she would have walked. Then other inquiries had to be dealt with. You had inquiries, national inquiries, you had inquiries dealing with people with previous convictions for that type of offence or for sexual offences. So there was a lot of work to be done and a lot of foot slogging, to put it plainly.
For some on the team, this was all a new experience.
It was my first ever murder, and I was just learning how things are done on a major investigation in terms of the system. There was no computer as such, everything was paper-based, but everything had to be done in a clear and methodical way so that nothing was missed.
There was a huge amount of work to be done.
The police inquiries, the witnesses, the incident room sometimes picks out something which is unusual from statements or movements or a person, the background of a person, and they have to be followed up, and they're known as actions. Actions are then dealt with by the detective officers who are out on the ground. It takes a long time. The average working hours during the day in an inquiry like that can be anything from 12 to 14 hours a day. It's a lot of work.
After months of fruitlessly investigating every possible avenue, police were getting desperate.
Clairvoyants came forward. So many people came forward because it was a nasty murder. And the press gave it a lot of publicity.
With nothing to lose, a clairvoyant was introduced to Carol and the family.
She got in touch with them and they were clutching at straws. And she stayed for a couple of hours. But she kept saying things that Claire would have said, but Claire would never have spoken the way she was speaking, and she kept making out she was talking to her, which I found so upsetting, because if Claire was going to talk to anybody, she would have talked to me. Sorry. So, yeah, I had to ask her if she would go in the end, because she'd really overstayed her welcome.
In the spring of 1982, over 6 months after Claire Walterton's mutilated body was discovered in Windsor, the police still didn't have a single lead.
We tried everything, and with the result, of course, we didn't get anywhere. We had all our exhibits. They were put in storage in 1982. And then, as I say, I thought at that stage that we'll never solve the case unless, because of the sadistic injuries that were caused, were we dealing with the serial killer.
It was a horrible thought. Claire's killer probably wouldn't be caught unless they killed again.
This was someone who was really, really sadistic. And that was the type of person we were looking for.
The mutilation, the clearly sexual nature of the crime suggests that there's a distinct possibility that the individual would strike again.
The failure to track down Claire's murderer was a big blow for everyone concerned.
You have to remember what things were like back in 1981. DNA as an investigative tool didn't exist. There was no CCTV. Mobile phones were very, very rare, and automatic number plate recognition didn't exist. However, you can only do what you can do, and if all the normal lines of inquiry haven't produced anything, then unfortunately you have to be pragmatic, and the investigation is wound down.
Well, it's disappointing that you like to get a result. You think of the girl lying on the pavement in Windsor, and it affects you. I don't care how hard anybody is, but it affects you. And it affected other officers at the time.
The chilling thought that Claire's killer would strike again never left the officers involved in the case. And in December 1984, Detective Superintendent Linney received the news he'd been expecting for over 2 years.
I had a phone call from officers over at Denham to say that they had found a body on the golf course. They told me that the body that they had was of a girl, naked and with horrific injuries. Now, I thought, well, this is identical. The modus operandi kicked in. The modus operandi is the method used by criminals, the same method that is used. And that is the base of serial killers. So here we are coming to the stage where the serial killer effect kicked in.
Now investigating two similar killings, Thames Valley Police were forced to wonder, had Claire's murderer struck again? Just over 3 years after the unsolved murder of Claire Walterton in Windsor, a mutilated body of a woman called Deirdre Sainsbury was found dumped at a golf course in Denham. It was a discovery that grabbed the police's attention. The body found on the golf course had chilling similarities to the murder of Claire Walterton.
As soon as I heard of this incident and the fact that it was identical more or less to the girl that was found in Windsor, Claire Walterton's name, of course, was there, printed all over it.
A murder investigation was immediately launched.
The police publicised the fact of the murder, and by chance, a man had seen Deirdre get into a vehicle on the South Circular Road in Richmond. That man had only recently read an article in the Reader's Digest which talked about the dangers of hitchhikers, and he had the presence of mind to record the index number or registration number of the car that this hitchhiker had got into.
It was a huge piece of luck.
Police from the Denham inquiry, having received the registered owner of the vehicle, went to the house of Colin Campbell, who was the registered owner. They searched his property and found in the garage the clothing from the girl found on the golf course at Denham.
Police arrested and interviewed 37-year-old travelling salesman and keen amateur hockey player, Colin Campbell.
He admitted picking Deirdre up, stated that he chatted to her en route. In doing so, he gave his name, or his first name, and he felt, as he was getting on so well with her, he would try it on. He did. According to him, she retaliated and hit him, and then he hit her. But he stated he hit her so hard that she became unconscious. He stated he then panicked because he'd given his name to her, and in a panic, he then hit her about the head with a hockey stick, which is in the back of his car.
Campbell also admitted mutilating the body, allegedly to make it look like a maniac had done it. Convinced that there was a strong connection between Deirdre and Claire's killings, Detective Superintendent Linney went to see Campbell, hoping he might also confess to Claire's murder.
He was absolutely so suave, so complete, answered everything that I asked. Windsor? Oh yes, he'd been to Windsor. He'd been everywhere that I mentioned. But I had nothing whatsoever at that stage to connect him with Claire's murder. Nothing had been found at his property. And so I was left as I was in the beginning. And which was rather sad actually, because I thought that he might just break, but no.
It was disappointing, but the investigation into the brutal murder of Deirdre Sainsbury moved quickly.
Having been interviewed, admitted being responsible for Deirdre's death, he was charged with the murder and stood trial at Reading Crown Court. His plea in court was not guilty to murder. He stated that whilst responsible for Deirdre's death, he killed her whilst suffering an epileptic episode.
The jury chose not to believe an epileptic episode could explain this brutal and sexually motivated killing. In July 1985, just 6 months after her death, Campbell was convicted of Deirdre Sainsbury's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. But Detective Superintendent Linney wasn't satisfied.
It was too much of a coincidence that we had the modus operandi of a man who was sadistic when he dealt with Deirdre Sainsbury, and the same man, in my opinion, committed the murder of Claire Wolterton. I had to sit back and just wait and wait, because I felt that he might talk later on. This happens. They sometimes do, if there's something on their mind.
Unaware of Kenneth Linney's theory, as the years went by, Claire's family tried to cope with the huge void that had been left in their lives.
I think about it all the time. Always remember birthdays. Christmases is very difficult because she was Christmas. Holidays were difficult. In fact, you spend a lot of time thinking that you shouldn't be doing holidays, Christmas and things like that, because it didn't feel right without her being there.
For me, Claire was Claire. I can't explain to you how that is. Claire was just a happy-go-lucky Claire.
Most memories I have are quite normal memories, because having a meal was just never having a meal. It was always laughing, having a meal at something that she'd either done or was doing while you were having the meal. So mostly, when we sit down for dinner, I often remember some of the silly things she did. You know, she would either have peas up her nose or ice cream all over her face, or she would fill her mouth up with food and then laugh with her mouth open. It sounds awful, but when you're having a meal, it's actually quite funny.
Well, with my brother, it really affected him badly. He had a nervous breakdown and everything. So in the end, I didn't just lose a sister, I lost half of a brother as well, because he just weren't the same ever since.
In 1996, 15 years after his conviction for murdering Deirdre Sainsbury, Colin Campbell appealed.
He stated that whilst he was guilty of causing her death, it wasn't murder.
At the appeal, he put forward the same defence as his original trial, but this time with the backing of an expert, who stated that due to being on the wrong medication, an epileptic episode could have been to blame. Campbell's conviction was quashed, and in 1999, a retrial ordered.
At that retrial, Campbell proffered a plea to manslaughter, which was accepted by the Crown, and he was therefore convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment again, but with a minimum tariff of 1 day.
The presiding judge, Mr. Justice Gage, said that whilst the court accepted that at the time of the killing Campbell's responsibility had been diminished, he still constituted a danger to the public, so couldn't be released without going through a parole hearing. It wasn't the result he'd hoped for.
And at subsequent hearings before the parole board, it was deemed that he was too dangerous to be released.
As the years went by, Campbell remained in prison, but the unsolved murder of Claire Wolterton was never forgotten.
We didn't close the case completely, of course. You never do. We carried on taking inquiries and questions and answers from people for other forces ringing up. This often happens, and you compare notes.
Police remained determined that they would bring Claire's murderer to justice. By 2011, the depraved murderer of Claire Wolterton still hadn't been found, although police did have their suspicions about Colin Campbell, who was imprisoned for the strikingly similar 1984 killing of Deirdre Sainsbury. In 2007, Thames Valley Police had started looking at cold cases headed up by Pete Byrne. Claire's case was about to turn a corner.
in 2011 we had the capacity to commence a reinvestigation and a review into Claire's case. What we were looking to do was to use advancements in forensic science in the intervening 30 years to see if we could potentially identify the person responsible for her death.
What the review team found was to be key in moving the case forward.
One of the items that we submitted for additional forensic work was the tapings. These tapings had been originally taken to potentially obtain fibres. However, we knew from other cases that had been investigated by other forces within the UK that now you could get DNA that had been captured from those tapings.
The evidence was sent to LGC Forensics near Oxford for DNA analysis.
Tapes were examined microscopically and small sections were cut out and submitted for DNA profiling.
Pete Byrne contacted Kenneth Linney, who had retired, to tell him a cold case review was taking place.
Which I was delighted about, because I thought something might happen or come from that.
It didn't take long for the lab to come back with a result.
A mixed DNA profile was obtained which appeared to be from Claire Waterton and from an unknown male. We used that profile of the unknown male to search the National DNA Database, and this identified a list of potential contributors. Colin Campbell was amongst those individuals.
It was a name that was well known to everyone involved in the original 1981 case.
The moment I saw his name, I knew that he was a convicted killer. So I was obviously really, really excited.
The match to Campbell was strong, but it wasn't strong enough to guarantee a conviction.
At that point, they were able to say it was a 1 in a million match probability. Whilst that's good, normally for DNA, it's a 1 in a billion match probability.
A 1 in a million match probability meant that there could be up to 60 other individuals in the country who the DNA could belong to. 1 in a billion would mean it almost certainly came from Campbell.
So we needed additional forensic work to take place, which involved using a professor of genetic statistics from UCL College in London. That was going to take time, and also we were doing additional tests on other tapings that had been recovered from Claire's body.
In 2011, having been in prison for 26 years, Campbell was coming to the end of his sentence for what was now the manslaughter of Deirdre Sainsbury.
Campbell was a Category D prisoner, which meant he was allowed access out into the open, and obviously it was a potential danger to members of the public, the fact that this man potentially now was a double killer. So we had to make contact with the prison service, get him recategorised so that he was sent back to a closed prison.
Finally, after months of waiting, there was news from UCL College in London.
We had work completed by this professor of genetics who was able to say that the match probability, in his opinion, was 1 in a billion of Colin Campbell being the donor of the DNA found on the tapings.
The news meant that Kenneth Linney's original hunch in 1984 about Campbell had been right.
When I found out that Colin Campbell had been identified through DNA as being identical to a person's hair, his hair, which had been found on the tape taken at our mortuary, I was delighted.
On November the 27th, 2012, 31 years after Claire was killed, Colin Campbell was arrested. Police decided to question him.
Campbell showed no remorse whatsoever, and I got the impression that he felt that he was a victim, in as much that he had epilepsy, it had been wrongly diagnosed, he'd been given the wrong medication years ago, and it's other people's fault.
My lifestyle meant that the way I was, I wasn't averse to being friendly with the lady.
Yeah.
I may well have known a series of ladies.
Okay.
Claire may have been one of them. No, I don't. She looks like any girl I may have played hockey with. She looks like any girl I may have met through work.
Okay.
Actually, she looks like a happy person, and I'm glad about that. No, I don't recognise her.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's not to say I never ever knew her. I just don't remember her.
To my mind, had you committed that horrendous act against Claire, you would have known what you'd done and you'd remember it. But he was almost blasé about the fact, well, I can't remember what I was doing. We consulted with the Crown Prosecution Service. They agreed that Campbell should be charged. He was charged.
Once Campbell was charged, it was time to inform Claire's family.
Somebody described it as like a fresh scab that had been picked off. It was like an old wound that had been reopened, and that described it quite well for me.
On the 15th of November 2013, Colin Frederick Campbell stood trial at Reading Crown Court for the 1981 murder of Claire Walterton. Claire's mum, Carol, was there from the start.
It was very, very, very hard and very emotional and very upsetting.
Colin Campbell entered a plea of not guilty.
Campbell couldn't run the defence that the epilepsy was the cause of his actions which resulted in Claire's death. That was because the experts had given evidence for him in relation to Deirdre's death weren't happy to say that epilepsy could be responsible for two homicides.
Claire's mum, Carol, had her own way of dealing with the grisly details of the case.
I didn't stay in for all the nasty bits at all. But what I was in there for was quite difficult.
Claire's family had tremendous courage. Claire's mum wanted to come to court. She wanted to make sure that the man responsible for her daughter's death was convicted. But at the same time, and rightly so, she didn't want to know the full details of what happened to her daughter.
The prosecution called on their trump card, the DNA.
The key item was the DNA evidence. That's what brought the case to court in the first place. And when a DNA expert tells a jury this DNA is 1 billion times more likely to belong to Colin Campbell than anyone else, I think that was the key bit of information.
Faced with such compelling DNA evidence, Campbell put up his own defence.
He couldn't recall ever going into the amusement arcade where Claire had been that evening, but said he may have got in there, and had he gone in there, he may well have spoken to her, and he may well have touched her, and that's how his DNA got on her body. What was interesting was that the taping that from where the DNA was obtained was marked as being taken from Claire's buttocks, so therefore the fact that he was potentially saying was innocent contact made that extremely unlikely.
The defence were, if I recall, trying to sort of blur the lines a little bit and discredit the DNA, but I think when you say it's 1 billion times, that's pretty damning.
At the beginning of December 2013, the judge sent the jury out to deliberate.
The jury took quite a long time for it to come out, to make up their mind, which was just a nightmare again. You don't realise how much that is chewing you up inside and how much tense you are. And that.
After 3 excruciating days, the jury came back, and Campbell was convicted of murder. A few days later, the sentence followed. The judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, stated that only Campbell would know the true circumstances in which he came to pick up Claire Walterton that Thursday night in 1981, but that he was certain he did it with the intention of sexually assaulting, mutilating, and ultimately killing her.
Colin Campbell was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Claire Walterton. He must serve a minimum of 24 years. By that time, he'll be 90 years of age.
For Claire's family, it was a bittersweet moment.
I started to get fed up with people going, oh, now you'll have closure, because you don't have closure if she's still gone. she still went through something that was horrible. I mean, I am really pleased that they got him, but having it all raked up again was really difficult.
What he got and everything else weren't even long enough, as far as I'm concerned.
He took a beautiful life away. A beautiful life. Somebody who was just coming into being a girl, a woman. And that's just not fair. It's not fair.
Kenneth Linney, who had been involved from the very beginning, was there to hear it all.
The judge, of course, made it quite clear to him when he sentenced him that he wasn't going to get away with the epilepsy excuse that he gave before. They couldn't produce any witnesses to say that it was epilepsy. And the judge made a comment that if the Court of Appeal had known his background, he mightn't have had his sentence squashed. And it was nice to know that he was convicted and rightly sentenced to a long term. He will never be released from prison.
Although former Detective Superintendent Linney wasn't the only officer with a vested interest in the outcome.
Since 1981, Claire's case has been at the forefront of everyone's mind that worked on that case. When I got my current job, when I met old detectives that worked on Claire's case, they always asked me, what's happening with Claire's case? They were all extremely pleased when we got the result and Campbell was convicted. So much so that they held a reunion 6 months after the trial where they just wanted to meet up, talk about the case and just say well done, because it was all part of their life.
After 32 years of trying to solve this brutal and bewildering case, Kenneth Linney could be satisfied they'd got the right man.
Many more people would he have killed had he got away with the Denham case. Because if you get someone who starts that activity of killing young girls and causing horrific injuries on them, when do they stop? That's the question. And I believe that we did stop the makings of a serial killer.
Campbell was in his late 60s at the time of his conviction for Claire's brutal murder, which means it was unlikely he'd ever be released. Finally, Claire and Deirdre's families could feel that justice had been done.
The scenery is stunning, but the lies are getting uglier. Reese Witherspoon, Nicole Kidman and Laura Dern lead an all-star cast. Big Little Lies is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head.
She was covered in blood. It was a shocking sight.
She'd been battered to death. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary.
The house had been ransacked.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
A lot of people are scared living around here.
You just can't believe that it's happened.
The big fear is that our community is then under threat.
In the heart of the East Midlands lies historic Lincoln.
It's just got a wonderful, timeless feeling to it, Lincoln. We are a place of great historical interest. We've got everything, castles, cathedrals. There's a great many medieval churches, and
There's a great waterway in the centre as well, the Brayford, established by the Romans, so we are a good tourist destination. And people like the fact we're not overly commercialised. We just think it's a wonderful, vibrant place.
And in recent years, Lincoln has become increasingly popular with overseas students.
The university, which is a huge university and, well, pretty much world famous, they've got colleges as well. Well, there are a lot of students, and a lot of the students are foreign nationals, many from the East Asian area. There is a nice mix.
To the south of Lincoln, on the River Witham, lies the suburb of Sincil Bank.
Sincil Bank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, being adopted by the students and working-class Lincoln folk. A stone's throw away from the football ground. It does have a very villagey feel. You will see children playing football in the street.
The Sincil Bank community is very diverse. I've been a resident my whole life, and we have a lot of people that are from different ethnic backgrounds. And because we're so close to the university and stuff, we do get a lot of uni students coming to live down here, especially now that the university's getting more popular. We also have a lot of elderly people, but we always try and find a way to build that community together. It's more like a village. People are always supportive of each other.
It's just a nice, friendly place. Everybody knows everybody on the street and everybody chats with everybody. All the kids play out together. It's got a proper community vibe.
It's very close to the South Common, which is the major green area in the south of Lincoln.
You know, there's a lovely park there where people go and walk their dogs and can go and sit. So you have got the nice, idyllic, peaceful park only a short distance away.
But the peace is shattered on one summer's day. At 12:20 p.m, police are called to an address in Sincil Bank.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten. She had appeared to have been beaten with a blunt object.
The crime scene is secured.
The police came, they cornered off the streets, they weren't allowed anywhere near your houses and stuff. No one really told us what happened.
A murder investigation is immediately launched, and it's not long before the body is identified as 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang. But who is Mingzi, and how had she become a victim of such a brutal murder?
Mingzi Yang was originally from China. She came to the UK in 2008, and she was studying English at Lincoln College. Initially, she lived in the Humberside area, and in 2012, she moved to the address in Sincil Bank, where she lived with her partner, who she'd met fairly recently, Darren Grundy, and her young 5-year-old son.
Mingzi's son was from a previous relationship, but Darren quickly became part of the family.
As a couple, they were engaged to be married and were due to get married the following year.
But on the 17th of June, Darren had grown increasingly worried throughout the day when Mingzi failed to answer her phone.
He'd gone to work and he'd been trying to get hold of her throughout the day and without any success. So he left work early and made his way to the address.
Darren arrives home and makes a shocking discovery.
He found a scene of devastation, really. It looked like it had been ransacked. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary. There was a lot of blood in the address, and he discovered Mingzi's body.
And then he raised the alarm and the police were contacted.
As the police begin their investigation, they need to establish what Mingzi's last known movements were on the day of her murder.
Detectives will use a phrase sometimes that says if you find out how a person lived, then you'll find out how they died. It's about building up a detailed picture of that victim, because somewhere in there might just be the answer as to why this has happened and who's committed it. On the morning of the 17th of June, she'd gone and took her young son to the local primary school, which was a very short walk away, and returned to the address.
The killing was believed to have taken place in broad daylight, early in the morning after school, although the body wasn't discovered until Mr. Grundy raised the alarm.
The question is, Who could possibly have wanted to harm Mingzi?
First thing that would go through my head is to try and establish exactly what has gone on.
The initial mystery for the police was that the house had been ransacked. There had been a burglary, and that possibly an intruder had killed Mingzi Yang.
News that a possible burglary has turned into a murder sends shockwaves across the local community.
There was fear and a sense of shock because it's not something that happens with frequency in Lincoln at all. And the big fear is that our community is then under threat.
I remember hearing about it. My mum and my dad told me about it, and it was very upsetting. It's very traumatic knowing that it's basically on your front door. You know, you could go to sleep at night and something bad could happen. This could have been my mum, or this could have been my sister, or this could have been a relative that lived across the road.
Everybody was massively scared of what had happened because it was so close to home. It's 2 minutes away from the pub that I run. So that day, customers were coming in absolutely shocked and stunned with all the police cordons. It just is unheard of around here. You just can't believe that it's happened.
There was a genuine fear from people who lived in the local area that a burglar or intruder was at large and had carried out such a devastating crime in broad daylight. Neighbours were obviously concerned that this could possibly happen to them.
In the Lincoln suburb of Sincil Bank, the community is shocked to hear of the murder of 29-year-old mum, Mingzi Yang, who has been beaten to death in her own home in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
She was a local student. She'd got a child. We just couldn't believe that somebody like her had been killed.
And the fear on the streets is growing.
A lot of people are scared of living around here, knowing that something really bad's happened, and it's on your front door.
The first feeling is one of shock, and then wanting to know really what had happened, was the public at risk.
When something like this happens in the community, there's a massive impact. There's lots of children and families in this area, so to have something so tragic and awful happening on your doorstep, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
That's all we were talking about. Everybody was just in utter disbelief that something like that could happen so close to home.
And a lot of them will have been friendly with Mingzi Yang in any event, so apart from the personal impact, you really do get a build-up of tension throughout the community. People feel understandably frightened. Who's committed it? Why have they committed it? Are they going to come back and do it again? If it is a burglary, is our house going to be the next target?
With such a brutal murder happening on a busy street, police are taken aback at the boldness of the crime.
Mingzi had a young son who had been dropped off at school, and the killing was believed to have taken place sometime between about 9 and 10 a.m.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, in a place like this, which appears quite peaceful and tranquil, is actually quite shocking.
The idea that an intruder had managed to get into this house unnoticed and carry out this killing was obviously very frightening for local people.
With the attack suspected to have occurred early in the day, police reach out to the locals for any potential information that may lead them to Mingzi's attacker.
You're really looking for witnesses. Something that's happened like that with so many injuries and so much devastation within the house would presumably have made some noise. You know, had she been screaming and shouting for help? Have the neighbours heard or seen anything?
In a case like this, in an area like this, the community are absolutely vital. They are the eyes and ears, and they're going to know things and see things that the police will never get to find out about. So it's really important to get out in amongst the community and make yourself visible and ask those important questions, because just by being here, you may be approached by a member of the public who tells you something that in isolation might seem quite minor, but actually, when you put it together as part of a jigsaw puzzle, it could actually help to solve the case.
Local reporter Richard Van Plu is also on the scene.
The first time I became aware of Mingzi's death was when the police
put out a press release saying that the body of a woman had been found. Killings like this, obviously in rural areas, don't happen every day, and people are quite rightly shocked. And sometimes when you arrive at the scene, people will talk to you. It's their main way of dealing with what's happened.
But so far, door-to-door inquiries have uncovered no leads to Mingzi's attacker. With the fear in the area growing, forensics arrived to examine the scene.
When I arrived at the scene, it was a shocking sight. Mingzi was face upwards and she was covered in blood. She was in the main living room. There was large, pooled, smeared blood staining on the carpet all around Mingzi's body. There was a white radiator near where Mingzi's body was found, and there was spots of blood spattered onto the white radiator. The smears and pools of blood along the carpet had indicated to me that she'd been assaulted at one end of the room, and she was on the floor crawling towards the kitchen in an attempt to escape. The blood spatters on the radiator and on the adjacent wall indicated that as she was crawling along, she was being hit with a blunt instrument repeatedly.
Post-mortem results then arrive, which further adds to the horrific nature of Mingzi's death.
A post-mortem found Mingzi's injuries were quite severe.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head. She also had, interestingly enough, some defence wounds, including a fracture to one of her hands, which clearly indicated that she'd been trying to fend the attacker off. But the actual number of injuries and the nature of those injuries were very, very severe and would only ever have resulted in one thing, which was her death. She'd basically been battered to death.
But as police scour the scene and surrounding areas, there is no sign of the murder weapon.
The weapon used was believed to be a very hard, heavy, blunt object. But interestingly enough, it wasn't recovered from the scene, which suggests that potentially the offender may have possibly brought it with them, but certainly taken it away with them, which does suggest a degree of premeditation and planning and the realisation, even in the moment of everything happening, that actually they might have left some evidence on that weapon.
Police start to suspect that their initial theory, that Mingzi disturbed a burglar who then attacked her, could be wrong. This is reinforced when detectives examine Mingzi's possessions.
Burglary is normally where somebody goes in and steals something. Sounds fairly obvious, but that's what happens. So if there were items in that house, such as TVs, electrical goods, jewellery, cash, you would expect someone that's committing a burglary to take those. The fact that items didn't appear to be missing is really important.
And new forensic evidence casts further doubt that Mingzi disturbed a burglary taking place.
The perpetrator had gone upstairs and opened a number of drawers, which made it look like a burglary. However, the intruder had done this after he'd assaulted Mingzi. We know that because Mingzi's blood was on the stairs in the form of footwear marks, and her blood was on the drawers in the form of finger marks, glove marks in blood. In my mind, your average burglar, if they're startled, they're just going to want to get out of the property. They don't want to harm anybody. They just don't want to get caught. Why would a perpetrator repeatedly beat Mingzi and then take the risk of going upstairs to see if they could find something in her bedroom? It just didn't quite add up.
By re-examining the post-mortem results, police suspect this attack may actually have been carried out by someone closer to home.
The nature and the number of injuries and the fact that they were all caused to Mingzi's head area is a suggestion that perhaps this is a little bit more personal. It's almost like a humiliation and perhaps not just a stranger attack or a burglar that's been disturbed.
Considering the nature of Mingzi's injuries, the police would have to consider whether this was an argument that had gone wrong.
In the majority of murder cases, there is some kind of connection between the victim and the offender.
90% of murders are committed by people who know the victim, and normally very closely.
As police begin to suspect that Mingzi could have known her attacker and that whoever it was had a grudge against her, they look to her previous relationships, beginning with her ex-husband, 33-year-old Wai Hong Sang.
Police contacted Mr. Sang. He lived in the Grimsby area. He was a chemistry graduate with dual nationality, so he was a Brit as well as Chinese. He had gone through a recent divorce with Mingzi, and they shared a son together.
Police want to know where Zhang was on the day his ex-wife was murdered.
Mr. Sang was asked to provide a written statement of his movements on the 17th. He disclosed to police that he had taken the day off work.
Zhang's statement explains why he took the day off and outlines a clear alibi for the time Mingzi was murdered.
He had the day off work and he went to Sherwood Pines in the Nottingham area where he went trail biking.
And he could provide car parking tickets and receipts to back this up.
With a solid alibi and evidence to prove it, Zhang is discounted from the inquiries. So police shift their focus elsewhere, and to one person in particular.
The police, they would be examining who Mingzi had spoken to, who were the last people that had seen her. Obviously, in this case, Darren Grundy was virtually living at Ming Xiang's address.
Darren Grundy would likely to have been the last person to see Ming Xiang alive. He's the person who's in a current relationship with her. He's the person who discovered the body.
Mingzi Yang's fiancé, Darren Grundy, is taken in for questioning. And it isn't long before the police make an announcement.
Darren Grundy is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Ming Xiang. He's taken into police custody, and the police think that they have their man.
All of Darren's clothing was seized and submitted to the laboratory for examination.
The police were convinced it obviously had the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
It's been 24 hours since the body of 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang was discovered at her home in the Lincoln suburb of Sinsel Bank. And police have arrested her fiancé, 32-year-old Darren Grundy, on suspicion of murder.
Darren Grundy was the person that reported her death and was also possibly the last person to see her alive.
He was taken into police custody, during which time he's questioned and the police seek to gather further evidence and information to strengthen their case.
Police believe the attack on Mingzi was carried out by someone who knew her.
Police were convinced that this was a crime of passion. It's not unusual with crimes of passion that the victim is badly beaten. Mingzi had been beaten and sustained over 20 injuries.
The hallmarks of a crime of passion, I would say, are extreme violence, humiliation, degradation, that sort of thing. Doing something that's really personal, so, destroying something that really means a lot to somebody. And often it is extreme, gratuitous violence where there's clearly been some kind of loss of self-control because it's such a personal issue.
Now in police custody, Darren faces intense questioning from detectives.
The interview of a murder suspect is different from the interview of a witness. It's far more detailed. The officers that interview a murder suspect will be specially trained, and they use tactics and techniques with the intention of getting as much information as possible. During the interviews, Darren Grundy maintains that he went to work that day and he was trying to get hold of Ming Xiang during the day. He couldn't get hold of her, so he decided to leave work early, and he came home from work early and he found her dead in the home.
But police aren't convinced by his account and detain him further.
In order to hold someone in custody for more than 36 hours, the police need to go to a magistrate's court in order to keep that person in custody. So This is a serious situation for Darren Grundy. He's in custody, and obviously the police think that they have their man.
When police receive forensic results from Darren Grundy's clothing, the findings change the course of the investigation.
When we looked at Darren's clothing in the laboratory, there was no blood spattering on there. The blood staining on him was quite minimal, and it's not what I would expect from the perpetrator. I would expect to find a lot of small spots of blood on the perpetrator's clothing, especially around his lower legs. If you imagine when Mingsy's moving around the room and she's being constantly struck, the blood is spattering onto that radiator. Those small spots of blood will also spatter back onto the assailant. Didn't see anything like that at all on Darren's clothing.
But then a member of the public comes forward with some information that turns the case on its head.
The Sincilbank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, and following the news of Mingsy's death, the teenage boy who was in the Sincilbank area on the morning of Mingsy's murder did come forward. He reported to police that he had seen a cyclist loitering very closely to the back passage of Mingsy's address.
The young boy who saw a man on the pedal cycle cycling around this area, and he actually saw him go into an alleyway, which is where the address in question is.
He remembered clearly that that cyclist was wearing a blue workman's helmet rather than a cycling helmet. He made eye contact with the cyclist and then watched as he wheeled that bike into Mingsy's passageway.
But who was the cyclist? And could they be responsible for Mingsy's murder? The physical description the boy gives narrows down his identity.
This key witness reported to police the cyclist was also of East Asian appearance. The police now had to explore people who knew Mingsy matching that description.
And at this point, the police become aware that actually they've been looking at the wrong man. And they focus their inquiries in a different direction.
Darren Grundy is released without charge. And attention now falls on an individual from Mingsy's past.
The description of the cyclist matched Mingsy's ex-husband, Mr. Sang.
Wai Hong Sang had already provided police with a convincing alibi, saying he was over 40 miles from Mingsy's home on the day of her murder, enjoying a day out biking at Sherwood Pines Forest.
Mr. Sang has a solid alibi. He'd travelled to Sherwood Pines, where he had spent the day trail biking. So police are then tasked with establishing his movements exactly and whether it is possible that this cyclist could be Mr. Sang. In the eyes of the investigation, there is obviously a big difference between police suspecting that this cyclist may be Mr. Sang and may have committed the murder, but proving it to a jury is obviously a whole different matter.
In an attempt to track down the mysterious individual spotted by a local teenager, police trawl through thousands of hours of CCTV from across Lincoln.
There are so many CCTV cameras now, private, local authority. People have them on their houses as well. It's a real critical part of any murder investigation. The police will be looking at trying to find that person at that location or as close as possible, and then trying to find where they went from there. Where did the cyclist come from? Ideally, what did they do whilst they were in the area, and then where did they go afterwards?
And after hours of rigorous detective work, police finally spot the cyclist.
What it actually showed was that this particular cyclist, who was quite distinctive in description, particularly with a hat that he was wearing, was picked up on 40 separate occasions in 16 different locations in and around the Lincoln City area. The route of the cyclist was quite clear from the footage that he'd come into the city in the early hours of the morning, then made his way out of the city again.
the man is seen cycling away from Lincoln just after 9 a.m, around 3 hours before Mingzi's body was discovered. Detectives analysed the footage to see if the cyclist in question is indeed Mingzi's ex-husband, Wai Hong Sang.
One of the main difficulties in proving identity of someone on CCTV is the quality of the footage. It's vastly improved since many years ago when it was really poor, but you still do have systems now, for one reason or another, that are not particularly clear. They're grainy. You may struggle to identify someone.
With the identity of the cyclist still unclear from the CCTV footage, police bring Sang in for questioning.
The police will be looking at his background, his movements and his relationship, trying to gather as much information. They'll be looking at inconsistencies with his account, and it may be that he can't give certain information. So they'll be trying to build up a case against him using the factual information that they know and anything which can either confirm or disprove his account.
Under caution, Sang gives the same account he provided in his written statement.
Wei Sang told the police that he had gone to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham. He'd driven straight there from his home address in Grimsby, and he'd been there for the duration of the day. He was also able to produce some receipts from parking in the Nottingham area and a petrol receipt as well.
Despite Sang providing receipts to prove his alibi, police attempt to investigate his digital footprint by looking into his phone activity on the day.
He had turned his phone off when he left home, which he said was the usual thing that he would do when he was going trail biking.
So what the police decided to do instead was to examine the sat-nav on his car.
And what officers discover reveals a major hole in Sang's story.
The inbuilt car sat-nav actually showed that he hadn't gone directly from Grimsby to Nottingham, but he'd driven from Grimsby to Lincoln, where he'd parked in a lay-by for at least 2 hours, and then afterwards had then gone to Nottingham. So there was a huge hole in the alibi.
It's a shocking revelation. Police now know Sang was parked up in a lay-by on the outskirts of Lincoln on the day of Mingzi's murder. Could it be that Sang had cycled from this location to Mingzi's home in Sinsel Bank? Police look again at the CCTV of the suspicious cyclist.
The analysis of the cyclist on the CCTV showed quite clearly, with the times involved, that he would have had the opportunity to have parked his vehicle on the outskirts of Lincoln, cycled into Lincoln to Mingzi's address, killed Mingzi, and then cycled back out of the city again, back to his car, and then driven to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham, where he claimed that he'd been all day.
This key CCTV evidence proved Mr. Sang did have the time available to cycle into Lincoln and murder his ex-wife.
But the CCTV footage is still unable to prove if Wai Hong Sang was at Mingzi's home on the day of the murder. The only evidence police have is circumstantial and unlikely to hold up in court. But then, forensic results from a search at Sang's address returned from the lab.
The police submit various items for forensic examination from Wai Sang. There were items which were actually purchased after he'd separated from Mingzi M.
We examined a number of items from him, including a watch. The watch, when you looked at it with a naked eye, it didn't look as though there was anything on it at all. So I think the watch had probably been cleaned. But in the laboratory, once we could look at it using a low-power microscope, we could manipulate the hinges, the links, and you could see that in between the links there were some small blood stains. Those samples of blood stains were then subject to DNA profiling tests, and the blood was attributable to Mingzi.
As well as the traces of Mingzi's blood found on her ex-husband's watch, Further shocking evidence is found on a bicycle belonging to Sang.
The bike that we examined was a different bicycle from the bike in the CCTV, but it was in the car on the day. The initial visual examination of that bicycle, we couldn't find any blood. But once we got it in the laboratory with specialised lighting and the low power microscope, there was a small blood stain that was located on the handlebar. Again, that was subject to DNA profiling test, and that came back blood attributable to Mingzi. So, from my examination of these objects, it was obvious that he has tried to cover all of his tracks, and he has done so quite successfully because we've only found these two small blood stains. We examined many other items from that individual and didn't find anything on them. And he's obviously done a good job of covering his tracks, but these minute traces left in these difficult to locate areas is what indicated that he was the perpetrator.
Wai Hong Sang is charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Mingzi Yang.
The police have circumstantial evidence. They have Wei Sang in Lincoln, in the area at the time of the murder. They have the forensic evidence that links him as well. What they haven't got is a specific motive or a reason why he's committed this awful attack on his ex-wife.
Police obviously believed they had their man, but now they had to prove a motive. Why had Mr. Sang chosen to kill his ex-wife?
"33-year-old Wai Hong Sang has been charged with the murder of his ex-wife, 29-year-old Mingzi Yang, in the Sinsel Bank area of Lincoln. Having pleaded not guilty, the case is sent for trial.
Mr. Sang's trial was heard at Lincoln Crown Court, which is a very old courtroom in the grounds of Lincoln Castle. It is all a wood panel building. The judge sits high above the courtroom in a wooden seat. The defendant sits opposite in the dock, and witnesses give evidence to his right. It is a very personal experience for everybody in the room.
As any officer involved in a murder case, you always will feel an amount of apprehension before a murder trial, because no matter how strong the case appears to be, and no matter how happy you are with how the investigation has gathered pace and been concluded at that point, there's always an opportunity and a chance that something could come up during the trial that could change the direction of things. And even if it is a technicality or something that doesn't directly impinge on the actual case itself, sometimes that can be something that influences a jury in a kind of negative way.
As the trial begins, local reporter Richard Van Plu observes Mingzi's alleged killer in the courtroom.
Sang was very composed. He was obviously a very intelligent man and was following the proceedings intently, but showed little emotion.
The prosecution opens their case against Sang.
The prosecution presented a strong case, backed by the CCTV evidence and the sat-nav evidence, but it wasn't an overwhelming case.
The prosecution in the case were looking to show that there was a degree of pre-planning and preparation in this case, the way that Wei Sang had behaved, the fact that he'd lied about where he'd been, that he came to Lincoln in his vehicle, then came on his pedal cycle into the city centre. The fact that there were so many injuries inflicted on Mingzi Yang, it was clearly a personal attack, and it was clearly something that he'd planned, and he'd tried to cover his tracks very carefully.
The pathology evidence presented at trial showed that the injury that most likely killed Mingzi was a brutal wound to the head. But the murder weapon was never recovered, and the prosecution suggested that this meant it was carried out by somebody with premeditation who had taken that weapon away and made sure that it wasn't found.
To the courtroom's surprise, Sang agrees to give evidence.
As a journalist in the courtroom, you sit in a wood-panelled seat right next to the witness box where Mr. Sang gave evidence. And confronted by the evidence from the sat-nav, Sang gave an account that he did leave his car in the lay-by near Lincoln. This differed from the account that he initially gave the police.
Sang agrees that yes, he did go to Lincoln, but rather than going into Lincoln City on a push bike, he said that he drove to the outskirts of Lincoln, he parked in a lay-by, and he slept for a couple of hours.
And the reason he gave for not telling the police this during his first account was that he didn't want his new partner to find out that he'd been sleeping.
The prosecution confronts Sang with the CCTV footage from the day of the murder. They are convinced this is Sang heading towards Sincil Bank.
Sang was adamant that the cyclist in the blue work helmet was not him, and that he remained in his car asleep on the outskirts of Lincoln.
Wei Sang denies being the person on the pedal cycle. He simply says it's not him.
Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence against Sang, the court are yet to hear a motive behind the killing. But then, details of Mingzi and Sang's marriage are revealed to the jury.
It's revealed that there was a history of coercion and abuse from Wei Sang against Mingzi Yang. It's been going on for some time before they actually divorced. Domestic abuse, it's very rarely isolated. It's something that will often go on perhaps for years. I read a statistic recently that said that there were 50 incidents of domestic abuse that would normally occur before someone calls for help. And the victim will often put up with abuse or coercion for a long period of time before they eventually come to the point where they actually ask for help. Mingzi Yang had actually reported previous incidents of domestic abuse to Humberside Police on 3 separate occasions before she moved to Lincoln and actually before Darren Grundy had come onto the scene.
In 2012, Mingzi divorced from Sang and moved to Lincoln to start a new life for herself. The pair then only saw each other when handing over their son to one another as part of an arrangement made by the court. The abuse that she had suffered appeared to have ended. But then, relations with her former husband took a sudden drop.
During the trial, it was established that the divorce between Mingzi and Sang had not been straightforward. There had been some disagreements over the custody of their son. And obviously, that is something that can raise very high emotions.
Mingzi and Sang had initially settled on shared custody of their son. But in the lead up to that fateful morning, it appears Mingzi had put in motion plans to end this.
They shared custody, but the prosecution put the motive on the basis that he got a letter a few days before where she wanted more custody of their son.
Wei Sang had received at least one letter in relation to those custody arrangements, so it's believed that actually Mingzi Yang was looking to see more of her son, and Wei Sang wasn't happy with that, and this potentially was the reason why he killed her. In my experience, in a case involving children and personal relationships, it can be something on the face of it quite simple, and in isolation perhaps not as serious, that can send somebody over the edge. Could potentially be a build-up of tension and stress over a period of time, and the person just kind of snaps.
In January 2015, the jury at Lincoln Crown Court returns its verdict. Wei Hong Tsang is found guilty of Mingzi Yang's murder. He is sentenced to a minimum of 28 years in prison.
At the end of the trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of murder. They were obviously convinced by the prosecution case and returned an extremely quick verdict for a murder case. They took just 2 hours to find Sang guilty.
Wei Sang, I would say, was a cold-hearted individual, self-centred, deceitful, and clearly very violent.
But with his cleverly constructed alibi, initially deceiving police, was there a chance that Tsang could have walked away with murder?
This case stands out because the murderer prepared a very clever alibi before carrying out the killing. It is not unusual for people to try and create an alibi after they carry out a murder or a killing. But in my career as a crime reporter, there are probably only 2 or 3 other cases where someone has gone to such great lengths.
He's sat down and thought this through. He's obviously an intelligent person. He's covered his tracks. It just tells me that, yeah, he is that kind of cold, calculated kind of a person.
If it wasn't for the blood on the bike and the watch, although he is on the outskirts of Lincoln, it's not beyond reasonable doubt that a jury could have been convinced that he wasn't a cyclist.
The case really turned on the forensic evidence. You know, he may well have got away with that murder in years gone by, but fortunately with the advances in forensic science and the specialist CCTV that's available and the experts nowadays, he was quite rightly tracked down and sentenced.
If this murder had happened 30 years ago, at the start of my career, it's probably quite unlikely that he would have been convicted.
With Tsang now behind bars, the community reflects on the impact Mingzi's death has had on her family.
It's so traumatic. She was so young and she moved here, she wanted a better life, but she hasn't witnessed the whole life yet.
I think this case is shocking in terms of the level and the nature of the injuries. The sentence reflects the seriousness of the offence. Hopefully it may bring some small comfort to Mingzi's family moving forward. But at the end of the day, nothing will bring Mingzi Yang back, and it leaves a young boy growing up without his mother.
Shocking true crime Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix, when a victim of circumstance is in the wrong place at the wrong time in You Murdered at First Sight.
When you hear there's a murder, it can frighten people.
I was so shocked that something like that would happen in a lovely village like this.
They seemed to be happy with each other, everyone loved her, and she got along with everyone.
There were concerns about their welfare. The alarm bells were raised.
They had heard things happening, shouting, fights.
It was weird. It's as if he was trying to tell us something.
He went off on what can only be described as a drink and drugs binge. Ultimately, it led to the tragic death of a lovely, caring wife.
Lovely woman who was taken away from us by a horrible, sadistic man.
Situated in the stunning rolling wolds of North Lincolnshire lies the peaceful village of Worlaby.
I've lived in Worlaby for 48 years. It's a really nice, quiet village. Everybody seems to know everybody. We get on really well.
Last year, we won the Best Kept Village. It's a nice little village, plenty of activities, plenty going on. It's so quiet, it's a little rural idyll, if you like. It's like going back in time living here. There's very little crime, it's beautiful, and it's a wonderful place to live for young families or retired people, and we've got all of them here.
Friendly community, everybody seems like pretty much okay, you know.
There's a lot of people who help each other, so there is quite a lot of good community atmosphere.
And it is a lovely place to live. It's really nice.
So it's the ideal place for Ian Hamer and wife Joanne to set up home.
We're fairly new to the village. I think they've only been here about 5 years in total.
I think I met her once. She seemed a really nice lady.
Joanne in particular seems to throw herself into village life.
Joanne was liked by everyone on the road. Outgoing, always out on the streets, speaking to each other. Ian, you would never see. He would be in his home quite a lot. Joanne, complete opposite. Everyone loved her, a really welcoming woman, and she got along with everyone. And so people wanted to open up to her, and that's why I think she quickly integrated into Worlby and loved living there.
Joanne also has a successful career at the local council where she manages their healthy lifestyle service. After 6 years there, she's risen to become the public face of their healthy living campaigns.
She was quite a bright, some would say brilliant person who had a quite substantial job working with the local authority and really independently minded in some respects.
Just a lovely woman who did wonders for the council. Everyone loved her at the council, and no one had a bad word to say about her.
Ian Hamer, Joanne's husband of 27 years, works as a self-employed business consultant.
He worked in many businesses and earning money here and there, and to sustain a reasonable living, you know. He had a nice place in Worlby, quite an expensive area to live in, so he must have been doing okay in his profession, I guess. They seemed to be happy with each other. Friends and family said that there was a good couple for the large part. Married a long time, nice family, 3 kids. It was all seemingly going well.
But what seems like an idyllic life is about to change.
Humberside Police, what's your emergency?
Humberside Police are called after Joanne fails to turn up for work. Her elderly mother has also been trying to reach her, to no avail.
They did speak most days, if not every day, because her mother was very ill as well. And Joanne used to help to look after her. And that raised sufficient concern for her to ring the police.
There were concerns about her welfare. The alarm bells were raised.
And a concern for welfare incident was generated, which resulted in the police attending.
Police make their way over to the family home. When they knock on the door, there's no answer. So the officers break in. When they search through the house, nothing could prepare police for what they find in the master bedroom. Joanne Hamer's lying lifeless on her bed.
Medical professionals will have been called immediately. You know, monitors would have been placed on to see if there's any signs of heart trace or anything. Any chance whatsoever that resuscitation could take place.
They had discovered she was dead. It's apparent she'd been killed from the scene, the way she was left. And there was blood at the scene as well.
Joanne had been strangled by her dressing gown cord.
That's when we're looking at securing evidence within that scene.
Teams of police descend on Worlby. The quiet village has never seen anything like it.
When I came back from work, there was police cars, vans, and I'm saying, what's going on? What on earth are all the police doing here? Something happened, and then when I got home and my daughter texted me and said she'd seen it, that there'd been a murder. I just couldn't believe it. I was so shocked that something like that would happen in a lovely village like this. You don't expect it.
As word spreads fast through the neighbourhood, the local newspaper gets wind of an incident in Worlby. Reporter Charlie Wilson heads to the scene.
So you're like, OK, we've got a big story. Let's get there first. Let's be quick. Let's be first. So we got down there. We were the first people there. Very quickly, it was evident this could be a very serious, scary incident. I've never reported on a murder before. That's the first time that's happened to me. So it was a case of doing it really delicately, respectfully, and just trying to build up what had happened, really.
Soon, the news is spreading beyond the boundaries of the village.
Maybe an hour later, you get the likes of ITV, BBC, Sky coming down, and that's when it was like, whoa, okay, people out on the road, like, wondering what's going on. Yeah, everyone was shocked to see the amount of media attention.
You just don't get this sort of thing in these sort of villages.
Yeah, I was quite shocked, really. You would never think that something would happen in a small community like this. I couldn't believe it.
Everybody was shocked. It didn't seem right. Something like that would happen here. You hear about it in cities, but in a little quiet Lincolnshire village, you just don't expect it at all.
Joanne's family are left devastated by the news, and her colleagues at work are also reeling.
Truly sad. I spoke to a few of them. They were just in pieces. Of course, it would be. Their colleague who they loved dearly. I mean, I really did love her. It was tough for him. It was very tough.
And it dawns on Joe's village that there's a killer living in their midst.
I think some people were a little bit upset. They were locking the doors a bit more quickly.
I think the first reaction is alarm, because when you hear there's a murder but you don't know the circumstances, and it can frighten people into thinking we've got a killer at large who's going to cause more trouble. You're quite fearful about what it could mean and what the implications for the future are.
It was very awful to hear that it had happened in our village. It's frightening. It really is.
With fear spreading quickly throughout the village, Humberside Police needs to work fast to establish who committed this horrendous crime. And first, they look at Joanne's home life.
This marriage on the surface, to all intents and purposes, would have looked like a stable, normal marriage without too many problems. The reality was quite different.
What I heard was that their marriage wasn't great by the people on the road who lived there, because they had heard things happening, let's just say, whether it be shouting, fights.
It turns out Joanne and Ian had recently had a trial separation, but then Joanne decided to return to the family home.
Joanne Hamer had sought to see if she could give the relationship one last chance. This was part of her trying to make the relationship work.
This new information puts husband Ian in a new light.
Maybe Joanne tried to keep certain things to herself to hide what was really going on at the home to save her marriage.
With Ian Hamer nowhere to be seen, police suspicions are starting to build.
We do know in this particular case that a neighbour had reported an argument in the morning between them.
I spoke to the woman who heard the incident around 4 o'clock in the morning, around that time. She had heard screams, shouts for help.
And then the argument ceased.
Police launch an urgent public appeal to help them find Joanne's husband. They need to track down Ian Hamer, and fast. In the quiet Lincolnshire village of Werleby, police have launched a murder hunt. Mother of 3, Joanne Hamer, has been found strangled in her bed. Husband Ian has mysteriously disappeared since a row reported by neighbours in the early hours of the morning. And this doesn't seem to be the first either.
I guess people on the road had heard these things where it really went bad, to say the least. None of the neighbours who I spoke to liked him at all.
With Ian Hamer now under suspicion, Humberside Police make an urgent appeal for his whereabouts. They release the details of his car, a white BMW 5 Series. They also warn the public not to approach him.
Once a decision had been made by the senior investigating officer that Ian Hamer was a suspect, for this crime, then a manhunt would have taken place. They don't know at the moment where he is, but there would be certain fast-track actions raised to secure his arrest. You know, checks with family and friends. Where does he usually go to? Where does he work? Checks with hospitals as well. If he's got a mobile phone, has he made any calls? We may be able to cell site to where he's located and instigate an area search. He's clearly got use of a vehicle in this case. So, you know, we've been putting the vehicle details onto the automatic number plate recognition, the ANPR system. And as soon as that vehicle passes an ANPR camera, then that will send an alert to the police. All these inquiries made to trace and arrest Ian Hamer.
He plainly was the last person with her and had disappeared from the scene. So the investigation then was focusing on building that picture around what had happened between them. And then going further back, what had happened between them not just on that night, but also in the period leading up to this.
Detectives put Ian Hamer under the microscope.
The picture that emerged from witnesses was of somebody who was supremely self-assured, self-confident, and superficially was, or at least on the face of it, was somebody who was quite engaging and interesting. But those same people always spoke about, the more they got to know him, there appeared to be another side to him. And they also described how, over time, he could present as being very self-interested and, I suppose, conceited. So there was somebody who could, when he wanted to present in a way which was superficially attractive, but the more people got to know him, there was to him which was unattractive in terms of him being controlling, perhaps aggressive.
And after speaking to Joanne's family and friends, it turns out Hamer has a checkered history.
There have been a number of previous reports made indicating domestic violence. You know, he was reported to have ripped up her wedding dress.
There's reports of him tearing up a teddy bear, which was sentimental to her.
You know, this is really significant in a case such as this.
The police had been called out on many occasions, but as is so often the case, they weren't really ever progressed. Part of that was because of the approach of the family to try and manage what was happening within the family. The personality of Joanne Hamer was, tragically, to try and make it work at all times.
When you're married to someone for so long, you want to, make things work. And she shouldn't be thought of wrongly for that, for wanting to make her marriage with her husband of 27 years and 3 children work. It's just that he was so far gone and so far twisted.
There are a number of occasions where she left him, but he managed to persuade her to come back. And I've investigated, sadly, domestic homicides where controlling and abusive husbands have tried to isolate their wives, and we know that Hamer did this and, dissuading her from contact with family and friends.
In 2013, police discover this came to a head when Ian Hamer started divorce proceedings, blaming the involvement of Joanne's mother in their relationship.
So, he was antagonistic towards his wife's relationship with her own mother. So he was all about controlling and being abusive towards his wife and driving a wedge between her and family and friends. And it just shows this controlling and coercive and bullying and domineering nature of Ian Hamer towards his wife within that relationship. And that isn't uncommon in domestic homicide cases, sadly.
It seems the couple reconciled, but then in 2017, things take another turn for the worse. Ian Hamer starts accusing his wife of having affairs. Police analysis of Joanne's smartphone reveals something even more sinister. Around this time, Hamer hacked into his wife's handset so he could track her every move.
He would apparently follow her to work, follow her on nights out with friends, monitor her phone on where she was going, where she was at, wouldn't let her do certain things, apparently, wear certain things, and she was a bit closed off.
This is how obsessive he was about his wife and his jealousy and his thought processes, that he wanted to accuse her of extramarital affairs.
And a probe of the couple's bank accounts shows Ian's disturbingly tight grip over her purse strings.
He was keeping money from her, basically, like, I guess sort of giving her an allowance of what to spend and what she could do, and wouldn't let her go out at certain times. All the bearings of, you know, a toxic, horrible relationship. Obviously, she felt trapped. She felt like she needed to get out, and she tried to do that. He wouldn't let her.
In the weeks before her death, Joanne had moved out and was considering buying a property. But she was persuaded by Ian to return, 2 days before her murder. It was on this day, the 4th of May, that police background checks reveal a disturbing incident. Ian Hamer had been arrested for drink driving.
As well as being controlling and abusive towards his wife, he seemed to be losing control of his own life in some respects. He was drinking more heavily. So there's a clear pattern there of his own destructive behaviour escalating within himself, and particularly abusing alcohol as part of that process.
Investigators discover it's not only drink that's fueling Hamer's abusive behaviour.
He had a cocaine problem that had become prevalent in his life over the last 2 or 3 years, and that became worse and worse and worse. When he picked up this addiction, maybe his personality changed because of that, and his health, mental and physical, deteriorated.
Businessman Ian Hamer's respectable lifestyle is now questionable. And when they learn what he did in the hours following the estimated time of Joanne's murder, they're convinced they have the right man. Soon after that last blazing row reported by neighbours, Joanne's mother said she had an unsettling phone call with her son-in-law.
When family members tried to contact her the following morning, he told them that Joanne Hamer couldn't speak to them because she was unwell, and as he framed it, she had a sore throat.
Chillingly, police believe Joanne was already dead when Hamer made that calculating comment.
Just, like, sick. Like, strangle her, and then you got to tell her mum that she can't come because she's got a bad throat. Like, sadistic. Like, horrible. When you hear that, it's just like, I don't know what to say. Horrible.
And it appears Hamer used the same story again.
His son had attended at the marital home at a time when Joanne Hamer was probably dead, and that's when he first introduced that concept of her having a sore throat when he knew she'd been strangled and she was probably dead.
He also told his son as well when he was at the house to go and buy some lozenges because his mother was sleeping, she had a bad throat, knowing full well that he'd strangled her, which now we know what happened, was particularly chilling in this case. To say that she'd got a bad throat, I mean, how callous is that?
And therefore the question is, was that him being cruel or was it him buying time?
This cunning ploy tells police they have a calculating killer on the run, who wants to stay one step ahead of them. But it's only a matter of time before a false move by Hamer would reveal where he's hiding. Worleby, North Lincolnshire. Murder suspect Ian Hamer is on the run after his wife Joanne is found strangled in their bedroom.
And this is a man who, at this point, everyone in the area is looking for and knows that, okay, this is a manhunt.
As police cast their search net wider, reporters like Charlie Wilson are on the ground looking for leads. Suddenly, that morning, there's word from nearby Barton-upon-Humber.
We heard news that there might be an incident in Barton where he might be. And so we went to Barton and then heard he was seen near a pub.
Barton is about 8 miles away, and it's quite big, quite a lot of people, so it's the obvious place to go. You've got the Humber Bridge. From the Humber Bridge, you've got the whole of Yorkshire to go into and disappear. It would be a logical place to go.
A resident next to one of the town's car parks spots a man behaving erratically.
He was basically swaying around in the car park, making noise, acting strange.
Not realising it's Humberside Police's most wanted, Ian Hamer, the woman calls 999 to report a disturbance.
I think she reported that he was on Spice and shouting. Obviously, he was actually drunk, intoxicated, on whatever he was on. He would wander around the car park, shout.
A lone patrol officer heads to the car park to move this wild drunkard on.
Police basically just found a man shouting and being strange and realised this is Ian Hamer. Arrested him straight away.
The officer single-handedly tackles Hamer to the floor, then restrains him whilst he radios for assistance.
I have to say the actions of the officer that arrested him were exemplary, you know, real bravery shown in tackling this individual. And when he was arrested, you know, he actually had to detain him. This is a rural force. It's not an inner-city force with the same number of resources.
Meanwhile, roving reporter Charlie Wilson is close by. Suddenly, he's alerted to the breaking news.
A woman sent me a picture of a man on the floor being sat on by a police officer. OK, that's our man. So we know exactly where it is. I'm actually at a shop getting a drink of Lucozade. Run around with my Lucozade in hand. So I arrive at the scene. Ian Hamer is being sat on by a lone police officer, waiting for his fellow officers to come. So to come round the corner and see a police officer sat on who we believe is Ian Hamer was just wild, yeah.
After struggling to contain Hamer for nearly 5 minutes alone, backup finally arrives for the officer.
They must have came, got half a second after I came round the corner, and then police swarmed on him, got him away, and sort of like ushered us away. Clearly intoxicated, drunk or drugs or both, not in his right frame of mind, in the clothes that he was wearing the night before. We get him up, handcuff him, escort him to the back of the van.
Meanwhile, news of an arrest for Joanne's murder filters back to her village of Werleby. Residents can now breathe a sigh of relief.
I was just pleased he'd been caught for the crime, but to then find out that it was her husband, it was a real shock.
Detectives start to piece together what Hamer's been up to in the last 24 hours since fleeing the murder scene.
He went off on what can only be described as a drink and drugs binge. We know that from the inquiries that were made. Laughing and joking, you know, certainly no signs of remorse or distress.
Bar owner Pauline Dickinson had reported serving Ian Hamer. But when he arrived on her premises, she had no idea he was on the run.
He came in the pub around 5:30, never seen him before, asked for a pint of Carling. He got his pint of Carling and went and sat down out the way of everybody.
Next, Hamer returns to the bar and starts to hit the spirits. Soon, the conversation heads in a strange and unsettling direction.
Put the tequila on the bar and he literally looked either side of himself, leant over the bar and said to me, why did the Mexican push his wife off the cliff? So I did the same as he did, looked either side and said, to kill her? He went, no, you know it. I said, yeah, I do. He paid for his drinks, went and sat down. He came back to the bar 10, 15 minutes later and stood there.
Then Pauline clocked something sinister.
He hid his arm behind, but I'd already seen that he'd got scratches. I don't know which way, it was just you could see scratches on his wrist. One of my customers noticed the scratches as well and went, oh, he's one of those who's been harming. One of my customers said to him, hey up mate, what are you doing in here? Are you from here? He says, no, he said, I'm not from here. I'm just going through a breakup with my wife. So he went, oh, right, sorry to hear that, mate. He went, yeah, she's taken me for all my money. So he says, don't be sad. He said, have another drink. So one of the customers bought him a drink.
Over the next few hours, Hamer knocks back the drinks, laughing and joking with the regulars.
So he did about 2 more jokes to the point where the customer said, no wonder your wife left you. If you've got jokes like that, he went, that's maybe why she's gone then.
Quite significantly as well, he was seen to take his wedding ring off. So he knows what's happened. He knows that his wife's dead. So, you know, that's quite a significant gesture. And that was done, you know, merely hours after he'd actually killed his wife. It just shows the kind of individual that he is.
Some of the pub regulars seem unsettled by this customer they've never seen before, who has struck up conversation with another man at the bar.
My 2 regulars, they finished their drinks. I went, right, you 2 go in. I went, no, we're not going. Says, why? We're not leaving you with them 2. We don't know the other guys, so we're not leaving you with them. I went, oh, don't be daft. What are these 2 going to do to me? I'll soon have them out the door, don't worry. So they went, no, we're staying. So they stayed.
Soon the bar's regulars saw glimpses of another side to their joking acquaintance, who's going by a false name, Sebastian.
So we played pool against one of my regulars, who is a really good player. And during the game, there was banter going on. But right at the end, when the customer knew he was going to win, he picked up the broom that I'd got out ready to clean up and potted Black with the broom. Which Sebastian said, that is so disrespectful to do that. He said, I don't think so, I still won. I don't think he was very pleased and finished his drink, and he did actually walk out. You just get a feeling about people. You know if they're not okay. I don't think he would have done any harm, but who knows?
Next morning, Pauline's alerted to the terrifying news on Facebook that the customer she had served the night before isn't called Sebastian, but Ian Hamer. And he's wanted by police for murder.
My reaction was, oh my God. So I phoned a policeman that I know, and within 5-10 minutes, I think, they'd got him.
Soon the joke Hamer told Pauline about a man pushing his wife off a cliff takes on a sinister new meaning.
It was weird, but they were just jokes, like, you know what, a kid would come home and tell you jokes, but it's not until the following day, and I actually thought to myself, it's as if he was trying to tell us something. I don't know. It's not until the following day that things fell into place.
Despite his intoxicated state, Ian Hamer engages with the police at the point of his arrest.
He says something like, it wasn't murder, it was manslaughter. Something along those lines. I heard the word manslaughter.
He did make a very significant statement, an unsolicited comment to the officer indicating that he wasn't guilty of murder. It was diminished responsibility, so he was already offering up a statutory defence to murder.
After 24 hours on the run, Ian Hamer has been arrested in North Lincolnshire on suspicion of murder. Just hours after killing his wife, Joanne, Hamer was spotted in Pauline's bar, just 7 miles away from the crime scene.
You just would not have thought he'd actually killed his wife and just come blazingly into a bar a few miles away having a drink. When you hear them things, it's like, really? Could you be so cold-blooded and heartless?
When police take him in for questioning, Hamer repeats his claims that he committed manslaughter due to mental illness. But one throwaway comment soon after his arrest suggests this is a cunning ploy to reduce any impending prison sentence.
And what was a telling piece of evidence? He said to the officers who were tending to him, this was manslaughter, and asked this question: have we done enough for diminished responsibility? This was a man who was trying to present a picture of being so mentally unwell that he was not to be held fully responsible for his wife's death.
This is clearly somebody who's a very manipulative, selfish individual. And his response, he's already trying to escape justice for his crime as soon as he's arrested, and he's clearly given a great deal of thought to that before his arrest. And Ian Hamer clearly only cares about one person, and that's Ian Hamer.
In spite of Hamer's claims, he's charged with his wife's murder. Months later, mental health experts are brought in to provide a true picture of Hamer's state of mind.
After his arrest, he was subsequently interviewed by two psychiatrists to explore whether there were any mental illness elements that would lead to diminished responsibility.
They ask him probing questions about his relationship with wife Joanne.
He began to present what was ultimately going to be his defence. He accepted he had killed her, but in the context where he said he didn't want to do it, and used a phrase that it was some sort of psychotic episode.
Then Hamer starts to go on the offensive, claiming he is the real victim in the abusive marriage.
Ian Hamer claimed that his wife had taunted him to say that their children weren't his. He made a slur on his wife's character, saying she was engaged in extramarital affairs. There's no evidence of this.
He would say that she would see other people, that she would be on dating apps and she would find other men more attractive than him. And anyone who knew Joanne knows that that's just completely laughable and a joke. Was the most loyal woman you could meet. Just sort of making up excuses in his head, I guess, to find ways and motives to do what he did.
Then his claims turn even more extreme.
He made plain that he was himself a victim of domestic abuse. You know, he claims that she hit him over the head with a shoe. We've got no information about any injury, or certainly any serious injury to him. He claims she threw a phone at him. Again, there was no injury that we're aware of to support that. This was all seen as a tissue of lies. And clearly the people that knew Joanne had not seen any evidence of this whatsoever. And the only person who could suggest that this had taken place was Ian Hamer himself.
But soon, the psychiatrists start to uncover Hamer's true colours.
What was actually found by two psychiatrists, one diagnosed him with morbid jealousy and one with obsessive jealousy. But clearly, there wasn't an element of diminished responsibility for his actions. From the facts we know about the case and his behaviour and his actions, come as no surprise, because we can see the way that he jealously controlled his wife's movements and behaviour, you know, a real controlling nature.
And when detectives scan Hamer's smartphone, the picture he painted as the victim starts to crumble. Just days before Joanne's murder, they find texts he sent to another woman promising jewellery.
Things he was doing, he would accuse her for. He was seeing other women that came out. He was on dating apps. He would accuse her of the things that he was doing exactly the same.
We do know that Ian Hamer had affairs, he had one-night stands, and he accused his wife of the same. There's no evidence to suggest that that was the case.
But investigators are blown away when they uncover the name Hamer uses on his dating profile. It sounds strikingly familiar.
He'd use a fake name. Sebastian, apparently. He would use women wherever he was going to maybe go out on these dates and meet people. And yeah, to use a fake name, like, you're obviously up to something that's not good.
15 months after Joanne's murder, husband Ian Hamer is finally put on trial at Hull Crown Court. He pleads guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. But the prosecution sets out the case for cold-blooded murder.
So it was a consideration for the jury whether that was a man demonstrating real symptoms of mental illness, or whether it was somebody using any illness to formulate a defence.
The court is told the torrid details of the abuse Hamer inflicted on his wife.
The question that was raised with the jury is whether or not, by the time of the killing, he in effect wanted to get rid of his wife so he could move on, but he needed control of that situation, and that's how we presented the case.
As the trial progresses, even Hamer's own children take to the stand against their own father to describe the abuse suffered in their own home.
One of them spoke of being aware of that from a very young age. It had become increasingly toxic and abusive. You then see the horrible human side of this, because they're being required to give evidence against one of their parents, and in circumstances where they've lost the other one. And for them, there's no good outcome to any of this.
Following a heart-wrenching 3-week trial, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
The verdict of the jury was that Ian Hamer was guilty of murder. Therefore, they rejected that idea that his mental state was such that he was not able to exercise proper judgment and control.
He designed everything, including his response to the arresting officer, to make out that this was the case, that it was diminished responsibility. Thankfully, the jury didn't buy that, and they saw through Ian Hamer's excuses for what they were, just excuses.
Hamer's jailed for life with a minimum of 22 years. At the time of sentencing, the judge takes into account the years of domestic violence Joanne suffered at the hands of her husband and his abusive control over her finances.
The judge actually commented that he believed that one of the main motives in this case was he was afraid if the relationship ended that he would lose a significant amount of money. Money to which Joanne, in the law of England and Wales, was entitled to. Those were the family finances that should have been split accordingly. He didn't want that to happen, and he murdered his wife as a result.
Kill someone, go out drinking, using drugs and joking about what he did. He obviously deserves to be locked away for the rest of his life, and I'm glad that's the case.
Killers like Ian Hamer are so manipulative and so self-centred, and ultimately it led to the tragic death of a lovely, caring wife. But there's only one person to blame for that, and it's Ian Hamer.
Years later, the sadness of the case is still felt by those in the quiet Lincolnshire village of Worleby.
There'll always be some weird, I guess, aura for people still living there, knowing that what happened in that house happened, the worst crime you can commit. And I guess it opened a lot of people's eyes to thinking that this can happen anywhere.
I feel so sorry for the family. You know, one act like that and it's wrecked the family. And it's something they'll have to live with, I'm afraid to say, and it's not very nice.
Ian Hamer is definitely a master manipulator. A lovely woman who was taken away from us by a horrible, sadistic man. It was something you never expected to report on, especially in Worleby. I never met Joanne, but I know she's a lovely woman. I know that, you know, she deserved a lot better than Ian Hamer. Truly sad story, a sad situation. All you can do is just hope the best for the Hamer family, of the children. Just an awful situation, which Ian Hamer will spend the rest of his life in jail for.
Experience the power of science to crack a crime. Forensics Catching the Killer is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Fine, if you have no motivation, step back. I was at an important competition that could determine the promotion of my boss, who had always supported me. However, just when things were about to start, the computer broke down. This presentation required a speech in English. Even though everyone knew the content by heart, speaking in English without a script was a different story. While my boss frantically tried to restart the computer, saying, "I'm terribly sorry." "Just a moment, please," the person in charge stood up. Irritated. I don't have time for a company that can't even manage a proper presentation. My boss looked dejected. This couldn't go on. Although I was considered a lazy employee, I decided to take action in this emergency. "I'll do it." I stepped up to the stage. The attendees looked at me with disbelief, but as soon as I started speaking, I captured everyone's attention. This was the moment my stagnant life began to change significantly. My name is John, 35 years old. I work for a travel agency. Our company plans package tours both domestically and internationally, with a diverse range of clients and colleagues. One of the great things about this job is that I can learn about foreign cultures while staying in the country. Despite working at such a stimulating and exciting company, I wasn't particularly ambitious. Of course, the job was enjoyable and I found it stimulating, but I was content with maintaining the status quo. My colleagues were steadily climbing the corporate ladder. Some had even become assistant managers, which was genuinely something to be happy about, though I didn't feel envious. I knew there was gossip about me, as I hadn't taken any promotion exams and stayed in my current position without caring about others' opinions. Some younger employees didn't know me well and speculated that I remained a regular employee because I was incompetent or unmotivated. Although it wasn't pleasant, it was true that I remained a regular employee. I pretended not to hear the gossip and didn't bother correcting them. Despite this, the company was meaningful to me. In April, during the period of personnel changes, new members joined our workplace from another branch. Among them, a standout was Lisa. Lisa transferred from a store in a neighboring prefecture and was an exceptionally beautiful woman and a competent superior who handled foreign clients. She treated everyone equally and was flawless in every way. She had been dispatched to our branch as a candidate for the store manager position. It seemed she was assigned here with a promotion in mind. One day, I found an error while checking documents. The hotel name and address used for a tour couldn't be found on the website. Although it was listed on the internal server, I couldn't find it. Upon checking the hotel company's website, I found that they had recently relocated. Since Lisa had created the proposal, I quietly brought the documents to her. Lisa, about this hotel. After blinking in surprise, she searched for the same page to confirm. You're right. Thanks for noticing. No problem, I'll update the internal list later. Please do. Now, what should we do about the replacement hotel? The new location is too far. How about this one? She opened the website of another hotel and showed it to me. As we looked at the computer together, I pointed out a detail that caught my eye. This place might not fit the tour concept. The luxury focus seems a bit too much. You're right. Then, how about this one? This hotel seems good. They also have a 3-month discount campaign, and it'll be a plus. You're right, thanks for noticing. Lisa paused and turned to me. With an even more surprised expression, she tilted her head. John, were you just having a normal conversation with me? Ha? Yes. Were you following my explanation? I nodded honestly, not remembering discussing anything particularly difficult. It was just a hotel search. But all the websites were in the local language, right? Yes. And yet you understood them and noticed various things. It's just part of the job. I somewhat understood what Lisa was getting at. These days, few people are excessively praised for reading English websites fluently, especially in a travel agency like ours. However, all the websites we were looking at were in French. So, you can read French, John. I majored in it in college, but I can only read it. It's nothing special. Really? This website had quite a few tricky expressions, though. You can read it too, right? Anyway, how should we revise the proposal? Should I handle it? Oh, yes. Could you please? Got it. I bowed and quickly returned to my desk. Lisa seemed like she was about to say something but was approached by another employee, so she couldn't pursue it further. Later, our branch decided to participate in a competition. In this company, not only does the headquarters management participate in competitions, but branch employees can also submit and pitch their plans. Lisa was chosen to lead the project for our branch. Naturally, it would significantly impact her career advancement. I was included in the project team. Probably because my ability to read French had been revealed during our previous interaction. I didn't think I would be much help, but requesting to be removed from the team would only make me stand out negatively. Since this competition wasn't about a tour in France, I didn't expect to have major tasks. I resigned myself to attending the internal meetings for the competition. One day, there was a business trip related to the competition. Since Lisa was still suspicious of me, she had me accompany her. Reluctantly arriving at the client's company's waiting room, I encountered a familiar face in the lobby. Hey, John, is that you? Chris. The man in a luxurious suit was a senior colleague from my previous job at a rival company. Chris greeted Lisa and me with a smile. What a coincidence. Are you here for sales too, John? Yes. I'm glad to see you're doing well. Yeah, but it was tough after you left, you know? Ah. Not blaming you or anything. You were a big help, John. Are things going well at your current job? Yes, thanks to you. Good to hear. If you ever need anything, you're always welcome to come back. Everyone would be happy to have you. Thank you. Trying not to let my face twitch, I gave a neutral response to Chris's words. You're here as well. So does this mean your company is also participating in the Sakura Group competition? Yes. Well, a strong rival is troublesome. Chris said playfully before being called away by his contact. Lisa looked at me curiously as I relaxed. Was that man from your previous company, John? Yes, he was a senior colleague. I see. He seemed to rely on you quite a bit. Probably. I realized my tone was a bit sharp and quickly fell silent. Lisa seemed to be trying to decipher my words, but I continued to evade the subject. The meeting with our client went well that day, and upon returning to the office, Lisa dove into preparations for the competition. Although she was my superior, she wasn't much older than me. Yet, she was entrusted with such significant responsibilities and strived to meet expectations. It was intriguing. Sure, a promotion would mean a higher salary and better evaluation. But she was already in a high position. I couldn't understand the benefit of her relentless efforts. Was it a strong sense of responsibility or simply enjoyment? Either way, her actions were beyond my understanding. I had often seen other employees swamped with work and deadlines, but Lisa already had everything: respect, wealth. What motivated her continued to puzzle me. Lisa? I called out to Lisa, since she was still working past closing time. What's up? It's past closing time. She looked around in surprise. It seemed she hadn't been keeping track of the time. I hadn't noticed. Thank you. Are you heading home, John? Well, there's something I want to ask you. Something to ask? I hope it's not rude, but how can you put in so much effort? I mean, you don't have to be the one doing this competition. You have other work too. You'd still get promoted without doing all this, right? Well, Lisa pulled out the chair next to her. It seemed she wanted me to sit. When I did, she showed me her personal smartphone. It was filled with photos of a little girl and what appeared to be her parents. This is me. Really? My parents loved to travel and took me to many places. Indeed, the backgrounds of the photos varied greatly. Expansive landscapes, historical buildings, even some rare animals. I also traveled with relatives and with friends when I was a student. And I still travel a lot now. All these memories are precious to me. They all look like wonderful memories. Yes, traveling is very enjoyable. So, I took this job to help people enjoy their trips even more than they expected. My hard work isn't just for promotion or recognition, it's to make travel more enjoyable for others. For that? Yes. Of course, having a higher position helps me to achieve my goals. It makes it easier to get approval for plans, right? Lisa smiled and showed me her partially completed materials. They prominently featured a beautiful sea and boats. Travel